Afternoon, everybody. Afternoon. Bringing up the agenda. So, welcome to today, the first meeting of 2026. So, 3 weeks late, rather belated, but a happy new year to you all. Hope you had a good Christmas break. Hope you enjoyed thinking about all things scrutiny, about all things combined authority, and are ready and raring to go. So with that in mind, I think we can skip the usual phones off, shirts tucked in, exits over there, coffees round the back. We'll have a quick break between the two substantive agenda items for refreshments and relief. So getting on with the agenda, because I think this might be our first scrutiny committee meeting where we don't take the full 3 hours, but that's more of a guest than an invitation. Please do feel free to take your time and dive as deep as you'd like. Our first agenda item is apologies. We have Councillor Cousins in subbing for Councillor Estelle. We have Councillor Haynes in subbing for Councillors Robinson and/or Randall. So I'm glad to see that the Hull City Council councillors have such faith in you, Councillor Haynes, and no pressure therefore as well. And we also have late last-minute apologies from Councillor Jeffries due to illness and being unwell. So if we're all happy to accept those apologies. Fantastic. Thank you very much, members. Agenda item 2 is actually named substitute, but I suppose it would probably be more fit and appropriate to refer to it as admin. The first thing, therefore, would be named substitutes. We have roughly half the members who have appointed a specific substitute. It's just really to help Kunwar and Gabriella, because ultimately we're in a position where there's 2 authorities sending members to a third, and it's not quite as simple as the usual group office organisation that we're all used to enjoying at our councils. So as a result, just in terms of sharing agendas, updates, just today, we received exempt papers from Louise, and it's just nice to know who needs to be in receipt of those. So could I ask the 6 councillors that thus far have not submitted a name substitute to stand in on their behalf, should they've been able to be present, if they could please do so. And I'll ask them more in a week or so to give me an update, and if not, I'll start hassling you. And whilst I know you all enjoy my company and conversation, I don't think you want my hassle. So there's incentive enough. The other, Councillor Healy, please.
Can you just clarify waiting? I suspect I'm one of the people who have to submit the information to you.
The people I'm waiting for are yourself and Councillor Estelle, Councillors Haynes, Robinson and Collinson, and Councillor Waring.
Right. Okay. Councillor Cousins is subbing today to Councillor Estelle. I sub is Councillor Johnson.
Right, in that case, then thank you. If you could make a record, please, that Councillor Johnson will sub for Councillor Healy, and Councillor Cousins, you've got to go and either give somebody a fantastic opportunity to stand here in your stead, or bribe them, whichever works.
This is a permanent arrangement.
Yes, it just means that if you're on holiday, you're unwell, you stub your toe, not only do we know who's coming, but it also means the circulation of agendas are easier. And as a rule, substitutes are arranged in times of illness. And the last thing you want when you're bunged up with man flu is to have to make arrangements. So if it's all in order, it's better to prepare to fail than fail to prepare.
Be careful not to get knocked over in the rush.
Well, we are an energetic bunch, but as long as we're all pushed in the same direction, it'll be more like pinball than anything. So thank you, Councillor Collinson. The other element I wanted to quickly bring up just at this juncture before we get into the meeting proper is the briefings. Now, we did have a chat about this at our pre-meeting on Monday. It was decided by members that we did want something formally recording from them. Having taken advice from Democratic Services, it was decided we refer to them as notes. Minutes make what is an informal briefing feel more like a formal meeting, but ultimately the ambition is both to record the points raised and most specifically any recommendations highlighted. There were 14 recommendations from the transport briefing held in December, so lots for Councillor Tucker and the HEYCA officers to work with for when they present to this committee, which is expected probably around autumn, maybe September, possibly November. But that's when all the documents should be prepared. Having effectively done pre-scrutiny there, we can either be very happy they've listened to us or very disappointed they haven't, and question accordingly. And having that memory 10 months down the line, because it's been recorded, will be useful in the extreme. So I just wanted to make that A, announced publicly, B, make sure all members were happy with that, and C, use this as an opportunity to champion the briefings as an opportunity in this early stage of the authority. And remind members that when we do our work programme setting, we may wish to actually delete those briefings and do review panels or working groups instead. But at this juncture, it had been deemed that that was the way to go. And so it's just to remind everybody that in a couple of months, we will be looking at that as a philosophy and an approach and something we undertake or not. So thank you very much, members. Any questions, points, concerns or conundrums? Silence is golden. Thank you. So agenda item 3 then would be declarations of interest. Are there any declarations? Councillor Hale, please.
I would just refer to the fact that I am a trustee of a number of community groups in my ward and the city of Hull, and some of the issues I may raise in the financial report may impact upon those organisations.
And on that note, you actually reminded me of something. Louise did send us all last week a declarations of interest form. And in this case, rather than have you list them all and be here till next week, anybody who is interested in exactly how Darren Hale spends his evenings, you can find it on the Hull City Council declaration of interest page.
Yeah, that is accurate. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hale. So thank you, members. So then agenda item 4, minutes of the meeting held on the 19th of November 2025. Everybody happy to approve those as a correct record? I see lots of nodding. Thank you very much, members. And finally, agenda item 5, the financial plan 2026-27 and 2029-2030. So if I could please invite Julian Nielsen as the Interim Director of Finance to step up to the plate, please. The floor is yours, sir.
So we don't have any microphones, Julian, so could you? Yeah. Saying as loud as I can reasonably. Thank you. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. So I'm pleased to present to you the draft proposed budget for the combined authority for 26-27 and the full year financial plan for your scrutiny and comments. The combined authority is required to set budget by 1st of March of the preceding financial year. And this is the second annual budget of the combined authority, but the first one with a mayor in place and with his oversight. And there's a covering report to the draft report that's going to the executive board. We do have an original date in now of the 12th of February for that executive board meeting. It can take you straight to page 15 in the first instance. That sets out the proposed revenue budget and full year financial plan. It consists of, on the expenditure side, an operational budget for running the organisation, and then a programme of investment where we're taking the significant grants that we expect to come to the authority in future years and how they will be deployed in terms of an investment programme. I will just emphasise at paragraph 4.3, we are at a very early stage still at the organisation in terms of the organisation's life cycle. We're still establishing the organisation, requires size and scope, and that will mean that the budget is still in development really in terms of where we get to a stage where the organisation is much more on an even and stable basis. So my responsibility as interim director of finance is to make sure that the estimates within this budget are sufficiently robust. There's a degree of prudence within these estimates to manage the risk of volatility around change costs because of the growing nature of the organisation. But importantly, it's sufficient to manage those risks and make sure we can operate viably going forward. The major element of the operational cost budget is, of course, employee costs at 4.4. You can see significant growth there. That is following the approval of the senior leadership structure by the executive board in November. We're now starting to look at our pay and grading structure and started to draw out what we think the structure of the rest of the organisation will look like. And that has really been based on our professional experience in the senior leadership team and looking at resources in place that have been in place that combined authorities at a similar stage of the life cycle. So within that proposed budget, we've clearly will be going through a process of recruitment. We're out to recruit the most senior posts in the organisation at the moment, like chief executive, and that recruitment to the entire staff restructure will stretch down 2026. So we haven't assumed all of those staff within the proposal start the 1st of April. it is graduated, and that's why you see another step up in 27-28, where we're expecting by 27-28, we should have recruited to this language mature and have a contingent. We have put assumptions in there around pay increases for future years in line with estimates of the national negotiated pay award for local government. And the second most significant element of the operational costs is the service level agreements with public services and the constituent authorities, and those also will be subject to review of those arrangements as the organisation establishes itself in 26-27, and we may see a change in those arrangements in future years once that review is complete. In terms of the investment programme, essentially they reflect the grants that we're expecting to receive, but less a top slice for the cost of running the organisation, employment, the staff to run those programs at worst. The resources side of the budget sets out what we know at the moment in terms of the announcements that have been made from government, some of which are confirmed, some of which are provisional, some of which are estimates. Where we haven't got any firm estimate to base an expected funding stream on yet, we have not included it at this stage, because we will simply go through the process of adding that into the budget to the executive board when the funding is announced. So, for example, connector work is one of the major ones that is being. Moving over to the capital budget, page 19, very similar approach on those funding streams. These are the funding streams that we have had confirmation on in the bottom half of the table, that will be coming through in 26-27. Some of the amounts in later years have already been confirmed, some of them estimates. The postage scheme capacity, we've only had confirmation of that arrangement for 26-27, but I would expect that will be repeated in future years as well, but that's not confirmed as yet. Yeah, the flip side is just spending those grants, and the arrangements around all of that will work through with the investment board, with the executive board, as we work through into 26-27. And of course, we will be working in partnership with the constituent authority to make sure that that funding is deployed as it should be to fulfill its objectives. And I will just highlight on page 21, I've set out some lists there. These are the key lists that I see at the moment in the financial plan. Big being organisational growth and development, as I've said already. For future forecasts in terms of staffing, associated cost, size of the organisation, highly uncertain at this time, whilst the authority determines in full how it will operate in the future and fulfill its evolving duties and responsibilities. The national pay award to the staff is always a risk along with the inflation. And government grants, of course, there's risk in terms of future forecasting some of those government grants in terms of the certainty of those. But more significantly, I think it's important that HEYCA recognises that it's heavily reliant on the partners to fulfil the conditions of a significant value of its grant funding. So we need to make sure that all of the government's arrangements around that can provide the assurance that is needed, not just to HEYCA, but this committee, the executive board, and all the surrounding governments, that we are in a position to adequately fulfil those conditions and in turn provide that assurance. Section 8, I've just highlighted there that I have statutory responsibilities from section 25. We have added to review the robustness of the estimates and adequacy of reserves, and that including that the estimates are sufficiently robust and the authority of reserve cash balances are adequate. I've set out at 8.1 the reserves that I expect to be in place at the end of this financial year. Those are based on the last financial report to the board. which showed that we expect to have 5.7 million remaining revenue investment fund alongside 4.6 million remaining in the capital investment fund, and just over 300,000 surplus on the 2 months of spending in 2025, which we are using to settle the general return. And that level of general reserve, as the organisation grows, will need to be reviewed going forward. I'm satisfied at this point in time that we've got a sound financial basis to see. So I'm happy to hand back to you, Chair, at that point for any questions.
Thank you very much, Julian. And just to say that there is a microphone here, I've just realised, and I am the person in the room that needs it the least. So I would ask members to please enunciate. And if anybody is feeling particularly softly spoken, Poppy has got you covered. So thank you. So I have 4 people who've signalled to us far that would like to ask questions. Councillors Gallant, Hale, Haynes and Collinson in that order. So if it's okay, Councillor Gallant, over to you, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Julian, for the presentation. Can I ask about this year's budget before we move on to talk about the medium term? We obviously got a substantial budget for the current financial year, but obviously we've spent very little of it so far. I think you just indicated the investment fund would be rolled into reserves, but in the 3 months between now and the end of this financial year, how much of this money might be going out the door in terms of commitments, such as the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, which is £7 million. Are we going to be spending any of that this year, or is it all going to roll forward into future financial years?
Yeah, so the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, that is currently spend is underway through the constituent councils. We're expecting to spend all of that money, and no issue there, which is why we're not showing any of that money into reserves. It's the investment fund where we haven't got any, we haven't got to a place where we've taken decisions as yet on how to deploy that money. There's a lot of activity going on around business cases and the governance around those business cases to the investment board. We just haven't reached that decision point yet. So we may have more certainty over that before the 1st of April. And if so, it's just the timing issue. If we're able to deploy any of that money, but failing that, my assumption alone is that it will roll into the total pot that we have for 26-27.
So anything unspent will be rolled into the general reserve, not any sort of identified areas of expenditure.
Well, that's subject to executive board decision. My assumption at the moment is anything that's surplus on the investment fund budget, we will put into a specific reserve for future investment rather than into the general reserve.
Okay, thank you, Jill.
Thank you, Councillor Gallant. Now, for the benefit of councillors Haynes and Cousins, I do like to use the what we call in East Riding a wiggle, which is if you have a particular question on a train of thought that's being explored currently, if you give me one of these, it just means we can keep the train on that track rather than flitting about. And if you don't mind, Julian, I'd just quite like to quickly have a little wiggle of my own. And that is in the report. It does talk about reserves just towards the end of the report, actually, having been decided at 5.708 of an allocated revenue investment fund and 4.670 capital investment fund for use in future years. I was just wondering if you could give us a bit of detail, please, about how those figures were arrived at. So
the 4.67 million capital is simply the capital grant we have received in 25-26, which we have not spent as yet, and there are no decisions made in spending at the moment. The investment, the revenue investment fund is the balance of what is left of the revenue investment grant after we've funded the operating costs of the organisation, as well as the £1 million was established for the community investment.
Well, that's very, very helpful. Thank you. And thank you for your indulgence there, members. Always nice to hear that you've not yet to use the phrase finger in the wind, especially when forward planning, as you described at the very beginning in your introduction, is somewhat difficult in an organisation as new as this one. And I think probably the first thing the committee should do is recognise the difficulty in drafting longer term plans when it's so dependent upon things like grant funding, which can, as we all know, be both variable and unknown. So thank you very much for that, Julian. Next on my list was Councillor Hale, who I understand wanted to ask the same question as Gallant, and great minds thinking alike there.
Yeah, and all I was saying, I always say this to finance officers is, if my frustrations come across, they're not personal to you, because I know you're the mouthpiece for everybody else in the organisation as well, and you're presenting figures, but I'm really concerned about what followed the UK's Share Prosperity Fund, and those funding streams have come through. In the old days, they'd have gone to the local authority and we'd have swapped courses. They have come through to the combined authority, and no decision has been made. So what that means is there's 130 people in employment-based support services who are funded for in Hull out of UK Share Prosperity funding. 50 to 60 of those jobs, conservative estimate, are up for redundancy because this organisation hasn't made a decision. And anyone who knows about grant funded regimes, you have to really, to lay people off in March, you should be doing the consultation before Christmas. So no decisions been made. I understand this is going to the executive board in February, but by that time, people don't notice. And we really need, I mean, that wouldn't have been the case. And I have to say, and you know my views on this, this wouldn't have been the case if that was with if this money still sat with Hull City Council. That decision would have been made by now, and those people would know whether they're out of work or in work. So that there is a plea here. It's not to the finance officer. You are that those decisions are made and those people are put out of their misery, because I represent the ward with the poorest local super outfit areas in the country, or 2 of the 10 poorest in the country. People who get employment-based services there absolutely desperately need those. So if they're not going to get the money, it's going to go to someone else, and hopefully it won't be. But I know that the leader of the council and others are on the same page as myself on a political point. I know that the whole councillors are on the same page as me on this. But we do need to plead that no point in having money here and looking good on a balance sheet if those people are going down the road in the meantime. And as I say, I think it's at least 50. Officers tell me possibly more. And I have to say, if I'm getting a bit frustrated, it's because I'm then hearing that they're spending the investment fund spending we heard about today, spending on ourselves. Oh, yeah, we're going to employ lots of staff, bolster our great. So we're employing lots of staff here, probably on good salaries, whilst down the road, people are going to be walking if we're not careful. So you can see the disconnect there. So I think we need to say, please make a decision on daughter or son of UK SPF, whatever it's called. Please, timely, as soon as you can. If it's, and my understanding, and I get this from officers, so I'm not, it's not me making it up or being mischievous, that there's a lack of a decision-making process within HEYCA to do that. And that's, and possibly because you have no staff. But that isn't the fault of the poor, it isn't the fault of the poor recipients of those services or the people supplying them in Hull or East Riding. That's what it's But so there's a plea there. And if I was being really, and I'll try not to make it a sharp point, we've been employing lots of very highly paid people as consultants, even with AirSell. I think it's 200 people on, you know, temporary contracts, most of whom don't live in the city. So we've been paying lots of money out to people at a very high rates, whilst people who traditionally are much lower paid, supporting people who are not paid at all, are not in any way sure of their futures. So I'll just park it there. But I'm going to ask, as a recommendation from Scrutiny, that we plead that on the back of this report, that timely decisions are made, one way or another, regarding daughter or son of UK SPF, so that in a sense, those people have had a misery in wards like mine. Chair, thank you.
Well, thank you, Councillor Hale. And well, on the bright side, I can at least tell you that the scrutiny is both organised and robust. We have coming in February a briefing on the game plan, the business plan, the very core principles of how things are going to be delivered, the recipe, if you will. We have the corporate and people's policies coming to this committee meeting in our next meeting in March. And rather ironically or aptly, depending on your sense of humour, we have a Get Britain working plan being presented at the briefing in April. So we will be, over the next 3 months, 3 separate agenda items hitting many of the elements you've just touched on. I don't know if there's anything that Julian wants to add at this juncture to that as well. And also, if I could ask Councillor, if you could think about phrasing for the end of this item for a recommendation in terms of how best to phrase exactly what you'd like to see delivered.
Well,
So
I think
that
it
you
goes to
capture
the
it for the
executive
minute.
board in February, but I just want an assurance that decisions were made in February and that they'll be made and communicated very quickly in February to those organisations that you're not entitled to grant funding just because you've had it in the past. You're not automatically entitled to it. But if you're not going to get it, you need to be aware you're not going to get it so that, in a sense, people can determine their own futures, right?
Fair enough, Councillor. Well, anybody at that end of the table would like to weigh in?
Yes, just so we're clear first of all, so the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, many months ago now, they've moved it to the next March. We've only had confirmation of the local growth fund just before Christmas, which is what will succeed the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. Because duties and responsibilities associated any of it, I'll answer what in place to share. So it's because duties and responsibilities are transferring from the constituent authorities to the combined authorities, the staff associated with delivering those duties and responsibilities are within the scope of what are called the 2P regulations. So Councillor taking forget the time, but it's under those regulations that the combined authorities in active negotiations with those staff, and the process of transferring across is underway and it should be in place by the 1st of April. It's the plan.
I think we're talking to cross purposes. I know the East Riding deliver a lot of those services in-house by council staff. You're talking about the tuning of those staff. In Hull, that all those services are delivered in the voluntary community sector. So it's not, I'm very worried about East Riding staff and all council staff in, and I'm as an ex-trade unit, I would be, wouldn't I? But my immediate concern is the VCS. And I'm talking about all those services that are currently provided by the Humber Learning Consortium. The make no bones about it will collapse if we don't listen to Scrutiny. It might collapse anyway. But what I'm saying is that with the VCS, these are jobs in the voluntary community sector, obviously, often without local authority pensions, often without local authority levels of salary, but they are the ones that I'm talking about in the whole sector. So we need to make decisions so that the VCS is back up in this room, one or the other. Really. Okay. Sorry, it's a different. You are right. In each riding, they're all local authority staff, but they're not in the whole.
Actually, Alan Menzies of the Chief CEO would like to come in. So, Alan, over to you, please.
I understand Councillor Howe's point. The Julian referenced this. The numbers were only provided just before Christmas in terms of the amount of funding available. The two constituent authorities were asked to provide detailed information in terms of where UKSBF has been applied and where there was risk of to staff being moved forward. That information was provided, and as at Monday, we've gone back with some queries and want clarification, and that's on the basis that we get a detailed proposal to the board in February, so they actually fully understand what we're asking them to take decisions and what the effects of taking or not taking decisions. And so that work is in hand. Just a note of caution: the amount of money allocated is less than UKSBF last year, so it can't cover all UKSBF costs last year, even if the board wants to do it, there isn't sufficient funds available. It is being dealt with as a matter place.
Chair, I fully accept that, and it's not a debating point. One last go was I would say, but you have decided, like most combined authorities, to pay for your own bureaucracy out of the investment fund. An alternative way of looking at that was if there was a shortfall, is some of that money from the investment fund would be put to frontline service delivery rather than building the staff at the centre. So it's choice ultimately.
Julian, please, over to you.
Just a kind of comment on that, Chair. What I would say is that we have a capacity fund towards the cost of the organisation. See there, it was 2 million in one year, 1.6 million going forward. It isn't enough to cover the cost of running any public entities. So there's choices then. Do you take it from the one general grant that you get, which is the investment fund, or do you start levying residents and businesses within the local area? At the moment, the proposal is that we don't do that. I'll take it from the general grant.
Thank you, Julian. I think that actually really does put it in stark contrast. Is it coming from the funding that's given to us, or is it coming from the funding that would have to get taken from somewhere else? And as a scrutiny committee, that's what we're here to do. We're here to assess and make recommendations. So, Councillor Hale, if it's all right, I'll move on to the next questioners. And Councillor Haynes, if I may beg your indulgence, I've had not one but two wiggles from Councillors Collinson and Waring in that order, please. So, Councillor Collinson, over to you.
I might as well bring it up now while it's being discussed, Chair. I mean, it was the question of employee costs has been mentioned already, and you said these were based on the experience of your senior officers and other existing authorities, combined authorities. What so often, in my opinion, can be important is what hasn't been said, and when in this instance, you didn't say that there was any input from the mayor or his party about their policies influencing this. And my understanding, because I don't pay a lot of attention to that sort of stuff, but my understanding is that they have been talking about cutting public waste, and it occurs to me that this is the sort of thing that you ought to be interested in if that's what they're saying. And in my opinion, the proposed revenue budget, inclusive of operating costs, 6.7 million. That's 17%. That's too much. You should really be aiming, in my opinion, for 12.5%, and certainly no more than 15%. So I do think it's excessive, and I can't say I'm surprised that you, the mayor, suppose, but that's where I'm coming from. This hasn't been addressed much, but I echo Councillor Hale's implicit concern. This we're spending too much money that should be delivering services and money to, and going on bureaucratic expense, which is, in my opinion, wrong. I echo Councillor Hale's comment, by the way, anything personal, people who might be here or elsewhere, no individuals, but I mean, there's a matter of policy. Hearing that these have been based on previous practice doesn't really show. I mean, I worked in the public, I worked in the productive sector. Every pound of my taxpayers' money that's been collected, as it passes through various departments, various hands, a sliver gets cut off in any expenses. By the time it's got back to us, it's worth about 30p. Now we're knocking, another percentage off before it goes to doing what it's supposed to be doing in the first place. That's so basically, I would suggest that we should be looking at lower operating costs.
But Julian, Alan, I don't know if either of you want to come in on the proportion of overall funding allocated towards the running of the show.
Yeah, I mean, it's as I've said, we have. So first of all, to start off with, so the senior structure of the organisation has been approved by the executive board and to committee. So we're working within that. We have been pretty lean, to be honest, in the way that we have built out what we expect the rest of the structures to look like. The important thing to remember is we haven't spent this money yet. It's an estimate, it's a plan to work with. It's still subject to decision making as we run through delivery of that plan and change. I've emphasised the potential volatility around this, and it may well be that because it takes time to appoint, takes time to make those decisions, that we don't spend as much of that thing in the coming financial year. There's a good chance of that because of the uncertainty and estimation at the moment, degree of risk. It doesn't represent the entire size of the budget, as I explained, because we haven't had confirmation of all the funding outcomes yet in 2026. So it will be a higher budget than this. So the running costs will be a lower proportion of those funding streams that are outlined. I can tell you, so a good comparison for us, if you look at another combined authority operating in a similar sort of area, York and North Yorkshire. So their budget for last year was £31 million. Their revenue budget for this year is £160 million. And their staffing budget, well, their operational budget within that £160 million is £10 million of their staffing to start with. Now they're a year ahead of us. And you can see, you know, as you get established as an authority, the funding starts to racks up significantly. So we're going to make sure we've got the capacity internally to deal with that as an organisation, to make sure it's actually can then be deployed to deliverable, in line with the deliverable strategy, deliverable governance mechanisms, and operationally, it can actually deliver for the local community. If we look at some of the other more long established combined authorities, a bit significant budget numbers. East Midlands, £162 million budget, £15 million worth of employees. North East Combined Authority, £120 million annual revenue budget, £14 million of employees. West Yorkshire, £347 million revenue budget, £52 million worth of employees. So it will be different in different areas, but there is, as you assume those responsibilities and duties, develop the capacity to move on those, you will see the organisation expand. That's without doubt. It's just at what pace that is going to happen. But I agree with the general point that, you know, there should be a ceiling on how much of a portion of the funding coming in should be spent on within the organisation. And you want to be around 10 to 15%, I would say. We're looking slightly above that at the moment, but I don't see that as being something that will continue once we've settled everything in place and we have all the things confirmed.
Well, thank you, Julian. Thank you, Councillor Collinson. It's good to see you both actually aiming in the same ballpark for figures as well.
Yes, I was thinking that myself. I take that as an endorsement.
Oh, we had great minds thinking alike there. And great
I have
minds
to remind
thinking
people of this because no one tells me I've been right. I have to tell them.
I'll credit where it's due. I think if I may be so bold and say it with a wry smile, that to quote Councillor Hale earlier, we all need to be a little bit more conservative. But anyway, moving on before I get thrown out the window. Next we do have Councillor Waring, then Councillor Healy with a wiggle, and then it will finally go around to Councillor Haynes, who's been very patient, has fallen victim to the wiggle process, and then Councillor Murray. So Councillor Waring.
Thank you, Chair. I want to go back to the question that Councillor Hale raised with Julie. The way I understand it is that the budget's made up of grants that are brand new to the authority, new money coming in that wouldn't have come without the authority and the mayoral process being here, and grants that were transferred that would have, if we hadn't got an authority, would have gone to the two other authorities in the past and would have carried on without them. And the question that Councillor Hale raised was that old money that has just transferred into this organisation, the decisions around that haven't been made of how to spend it. And that is putting pressure on organisations and decisions that were made earlier on that are not now being fulfilled and have been delayed by the actual input, the construction of the combined authority. So how urgent is it to actually get that done? So to me, it's urgent that we actually solve that. If we've got services that are now under threat, staff that are under threat, that's to me seems to be an urgent thing to sort out, and Councillor Hale didn't really get an answer of how that's going to be done. And how urgent is it for the authority to solve it?
Well, firstly, just to say, there were several decisions made on funding from due to the combined authority that shifted across the constituent councils very early on in the life cycle of the combined authority. There's several reports taken to the executive board on the ones that certainly were most significant: UK Shared Prosperity Fund, the transport funding. Those were significant reports to the board where it was agreed that those would be passported through to the constituent authorities so that they could support continuity of those services.
But Julian, are we saying we've made a positive decision not to finance these organisations, or is it just that the decision's not been made?
The organisations that are supported by the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, yes, there's a challenge there because the government's brought that funding to an end. There's different funding that's now in place, the Local Growth Fund, but it's for the combined authority. You know, it's just announced before Christmas with the content of the conditions of the grant, how it's expected to be spent. The combined authority is now mobilising itself through the reports to the board to determine how that's going to be spent going forward, because it is now a combined authority decision that has to be made in accordance with its strategy, which it's working in partnership with the constituent authorities on this. You know, you are all around the table and we're working together on this. But in my experience in local government finance for many years, I would love government funding announcements to be much earlier than they are until I have more time to plan, but we haven't had a great deal amount of time to plan.
Thank you. I think from this, I'm pulling a few recommendations together, as is always the case. And luckily, I also have Poppy backing me up to make sure that nothing slips through the cracks. But I think seek and stress urgency on decision-making and deployment of funding is something that's coming across loud and clear. And actually, if we look at our agendas right at the bottom, there is the forward plan of key decisions. And our very diligent staff have made sure that there is actually the history there as well. We're not just looking at what's coming, but there is 10 pages worth of what's been done over the last year. And so it is good to see that there is an element of the decision-making process and journey that we can actually capture just by looking at that one particular document. The question is, what do we want to see as a priority moving forward? I think it's been made pretty loud and clear that getting those decisions done and getting those wheels of bureaucracy turning, because we've already talked about your crystal ball, Julian, and now we're going to talk about your magic wand, and that getting those decisions made is something that I can say with confidence this committee would like the board to recognise as a priority at their meeting, and I believe the next one is the 30th of January. I'd also point out, while I've got the mic, since as I said earlier, there is only one, that in line with Councillor Collinson's points, we also propose a ratio and potentially even a cap on the proportion of funding allocated for operational costs. And that I would advise that that is actually measured over the next 12-month cycle, because as Julian's pointed out, those that are a year down the line from us, like York and North Yorkshire, actually have seen huge proportional changes in their income and therefore huge changes in the ratio between operational costs and delivery. And so that will very much be a moving feast and a snapshot in time. And it might even be that we decide we'd like briefing notes whenever that picture changes, just to keep this committee abreast of it and to ensure future discussions, because let's be honest, budget will almost certainly be a statutory item, means that we can have kept in line with the picture rather than seeing it on a more interim basis.
Chair, was on the end of that, provided that all staff costs, including agency and the contractors and consultants, are within that envelope, and that we don't stick to that and pay them separately out of another budget, which is an old local authority officer trick.
Yes. Well, we do have Alan Menzies at the end of the table, who has been in local government for a total of 50 years.
I'm not saying Alan would have done that. I'm sure he didn't. It's just the authorities I've worked for.
If I could bring Alan in by pointing out that you get a lot of experience in 50 years, but you also don't survive that long without virtue. So, Alan, no pressure, but over to you to tell us how great you are.
I've got some sympathy for that, because to establish the combined authority from scratch, it had no staff. So it had to start off with buying in the relevant expertise to put together the foundations for the authority itself. My own view is we need to transition out of employing consultants and agency staff into employing our own staff on our terms and conditions, on our payroll. It's worth making points. We are still putting in place our terms and conditions, and there are a raft of HR strategies going to the board next week.
And here in March.
When I arrived in October, we had no process for employing staff in place. So that's all now been resolved. And, I'm looking in the next few months to move away from employing agency staff and contractors into employing core staffing structure at the combined authority. And that in itself should show some fairly significant savings.
That's very good to hear. And of course, it also addresses the point earlier about do we take money from the investment part or from taxation? And I have a sneaking suspicion I know what our mayor and the public will say about that. So thank you very much, Councillor Hale. Thank you, Councillor Collinson. And thank you also, Councillor Waring. Did you want to come back on that? Were there any supplementary questions?
Yeah, just one short one. Are we going to see outturn reports here at this meeting?
But that is within our gift, I would imagine, but I will look towards Cumwa.
Eventually, Chair, that you will have quarterly budget monitoring reports, but it's something Julian would be better able to advise.
Julian, please.
We are taking those to the governance and audit committee as it's being
Under their purview.
if you wish to bring it in.
I would expect it to go to the audit, but they've got a slightly different remit than us. In that they're looking at the actual governance of the finance side, the audit of the finance side, where we're much more interested in policy. And I just thought the outturn might be interesting to me because there aren't any other scrutiny committees that it could go to. We haven't got an overview. We are the overview committee. So
We are the answer to the question who guards the guardians. I've always personally believed audit and scrutiny to be two sides of the same coin. So whilst I'd be perfectly happy for Councillor Neil and his committee to be looking at this in the detail and through their regularly scheduled agenda, I do think it would be prudent and indeed beneficial if we as members could be copied in on any emails they have regarding that. And if I could make that as a request from Julian and possibly even a recommendation, because it's not like we don't all have enough to do over the weekends. More reading is always welcome. He says, having come from a meeting this morning with a 530-page agenda and square eyes now. But no, in fairness though, Councillor Waring, and in all seriousness, no, I do agree that we need to understand that picture and looking at it, especially as we found out earlier with the discussion with Councillor Collinson, it is going to be in a severe degree of flux due to the moving picture. And as Julian's already highlighted, it is very difficult to predict in such a new organisation with such intermittent and unknowable forms of funding by the grant process, that if we don't keep an eye on it, it will be baffling when it comes around for our turn to have a look at it proper. So thank you. I'll write that down as a recommendation. Thank you, Councillor Waring. And that means next then I do have Councillor Healy, who was the last wiggle before, and there will be no more wiggles because Councillor Haynes has exhibited the patience of a saint. So Councillor Healy, Councillor Haynes, Councillor Murray, please.
The wiggle was on the point that Councillor Haynes first made. And this is the extent to which the investment fund is being utilised to support the organisational costs. And this is something I think that our residents, are concerned about, because when you hear about the combined authority, what people are saying about it, what they're talking about most of all isn't skills and innovation, but it's all about cost. And the investment fund was very much part of the reason that councillors voted for this authority in the first place, that there was investment from the 400 million over 30 years, which is going to be £13 million a year. That was one of the reasons for it. And that is to invest in skills, innovation and business support. So what I wanted to understand a little bit more about is the extent to which the investment fund is covering corporate costs and the extent to which we will need to rely on the investment fund covering corporate costs in the future, because in the 26-27 budget, obviously, we're bringing in 8.6 million on the investment fund, spending only 5.2 of it. So within that amount, there's some of the organisational costs. So what I think we should need to be trying to understand as a scrutiny committee is the extent to which now and in the future, this money for business support, innovation and skills is actually being used to fund what many of our residents consider to be a fairly bloated structure. And I say what residents are saying here. We need to bring them on board. I think they'll accept the fact that everything can be contained within like the initial capacity setup costs, but to what extent will in future we be relying on the investment fund to fund operational costs?
Well, not only that, but if I may add to that, Councillor Healy, there's also an element of what this might be a new authority. What we're describing is not a new situation. Historically, there were the local enterprise partnerships that delivered a lot of the funding as a mechanism from government for this. And they similarly will have had costs themselves. And actually looking at the picture now versus the picture as it was, and indeed the picture as we would like it to be, that there is a journey there that, sorry, Julian, I apologise. I'm basically setting you homework for future meetings. Actually understanding the journey that's been taken, because really the big difference between LEPs and this is the transparency and democratic accountability. Ultimately, they're both vehicles to bring national funding to the local level. The question, therefore, is how do we get the biggest bang for the buck? I think, apologies for putting words in your mouth there, Councillor Healy.
That's one aspect of it.
Yeah, but that's what we're hoping to
The
maximise.
key aspect of it is to what extent is investment fund for a specific purpose of developing our economy and our skills base being used to fund our operational costs. That's and how much is it going to be? And you know, because that's reflected in the difference between the income on the investment fund and the expenditure.
In that case, then Julian, please, over to you.
Yeah, so just let's reflect on 25-26 months. So we had the general money we had to run the authority and run an election was £8.7 million, just short of the investment fund, and £2 million capacity funding. The election costs almost £1.4 million, leaving about 650,000 left with that capacity fund to establish and run an organisation. And as Alan's explained, to build the organisation, we have had to bring in interim resources, which is more costly than employing permanent staff. 6.7 million of the investment fund has been deployed towards what would be investment going out the organisation. So there's the £5.7 million budget there, the investment fund alongside the community investment fund has been taken from. So that's where the 6.7 million comes from. So you can see it's just short of £2 million that's gone to running the organisation from that investment fund on top of the capacity funding, you know, the costs of running the election. Going forward, as I've said, we have a capacity fund still, 1.64 million, but it's not enough to fund the cost of running any mayoral combined authority in the country. And there's a decision to be taken there in terms of how much you want to use the general investment fund. And I will say, you know, that the much bigger pots of money, you can see there, you know, £16 million adult skills fund, 6.7 million local growth plus grants. We have local growth fund of 5 million. We are expecting Connect to Work to come in as well, which will be multi-million pound funding as well. The investment fund is really complementary to all of that in terms of are there other ways in which we, as a combined authority, can promote additional investment in the community, but also you have to have the resources of the organisation to deliver that. Now, the choice is if you don't want to spend any of the investment on the organisation, we would have to reset the council tax, and that will mean additional council tax on residents' bills. It will mean potentially as well another lever is levying additional business rates on the businesses. There's no other money in the equation with it.
Or you could reduce the operating costs.
Yeah, you could reduce the operating costs, but that's and that we need to have that in sharp focus. But what the mayor has asked for is a lean organisation, and we build that budget in line with that principle.
I had two comments to make there then. The first one is a congratulations to Julian, who managed to say all of that without using the phrase, it takes money to make money. That should a Herculean level of will. But to be a bit more serious on this, we do have the people and HR strategy coming to this committee meeting in March. So actually that would be when we can really get down into the nitty gritty of the amounts of staff, the levels, the layers, the quantities. And I suppose from my perspective here, wanting to ensure good scrutiny, I haven't asked any questions yet. I've wanted everyone around the room to do this. What I would ask of members, therefore, is that when we do look at that, it's to look at what staff we need to bring in what level of funding and see it appropriately delivered. There will be a sweet spot, a balance of the seesaw in there, where we have the minimum level of staffing for the maximum level of delivery. And I would hope that when we're reading through those papers ahead of our next meeting, that the very discussion we've got that we're having right now is at the front of our minds for that. And we've had Miriam attend this meeting, every meeting so far actually, and our work programme. So we all know who's responsible for it. We all know her well. And I think I can say with confidence that we all know her to be capable in that regard. So we will be able to ask these questions of Miriam specifically with regards to staffing and the ability to deliver based upon what's arranged and what's believed to be necessary. So Councillor Healy, was there any further points you wanted to make on this while we're on the subject?
Well, just, I think Julian's answered the question there. The reality is, even though these numbers are small compared to the larger grants and all that's been coming into transport and so on, the fact is that the 1.6 million capacity fund forecasting going forward is not enough to fund the operational costs without diving into the investment fund. And the decision needs to be made and will be made by the executive board around how much of the investment fund they're going to take to run the organisation. That will be a decision that they take, but I think we just need to flag for the moment that this is an issue, that there isn't enough money to fund the operational costs without going into the money that was intended for skills and innovation and business support.
Well, I did make the point earlier that the difference between the LEPs and the mayor ultimately is the elected nature of it, the democratic nature. And so as far as recommendations from this discussion go, Councillor Healy, and please feel free to rephrase this to your liking, as after all, this is your point that's been brought up, but a publication of the decision and an explanation of it, because it is that transparency and it is that public accountability that we're discussing at this juncture. So whatever the board decide, whether they want to bring money from the investment fund, whether they want to bring money through taxation, whether they want to cut staffing to reduce costs, they are ultimately in a democracy required to explain that to the public. And so the request therefore of the board is that when the decision's made, that it be explained, it be made clear, and it be publicised. It's all well and good having it done in here, and we obviously have an army of followers on YouTube, but actually getting that message out there is absolutely crucial.
Yes, I think the recommendation would be that the decision is transparently explained, whatever it might be. We've got to be short of recommending what decision they should make. We're not decision makers, but that decision is clear. They have various options. They have a preset power. They could take it from the investment fund, or they can reduce costs. I think those are the key three things. And whatever they decide, that be clearly articulated, so that our residents can understand that.
Thank you very much, Councillor. I'm going to steal the word articulated from you there. I've got explanation, I've got provision, I'm going with articulated. Thank you, Councillor Healy. So now, Councillor Haynes, first off, welcome to the committee. I spoke for 8 minutes straight at the beginning, so I didn't want to keep going. I do enough of that as it is. But now you're on the mic, I'll just say a proper welcome to you. This is your first committee meeting, and similarly, while I'm at it, Councillor Cousins, also a warm welcome to you as well. But Councillor Haynes, you've been waiting patiently. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chair, and it's good to be here. I'm going to question around 4 different areas. I'm going to do it sort of, I'll ask the question, I'll hope for an answer probably from Julian in the first instance, and I'll move on to another thing. The first thing I want to draw members' attention to is obviously on page 15, 4.1, the Community Investment Fund. Now, in a Facebook video from the Mayor himself in August 16, 2025, he said verbatim, this fund is £1 million every year for the next 4 years. Obviously, this budget only shows £1 million for the year of 2025-26. So is it the intention that this fund will only be a one-off, or that it will be indeed £1 million every year for the next 4 years?
The decision's only been taken for year one. £1 million so that the success or otherwise of that fund can be measured. At that point, if it's not that it would be worthwhile to renew that fund, then I expect the proposal would come to the executive board by the investment board to renew that proposal. Not knowing the decision's only been taken on.
So at the present time, it is only forecast for 1 year in the budget. Okay. Secondly, you mentioned that the mayor wanted a lean, or if I'm paraphrasing, some kind of leaner budget. I wondered if there was a view on increase in his mayoral salary of 9.2% over the forecast period, if that was considered lean.
Where's 9%?
When you allow for the 3.2% in 6-7 and then combined a 2% for the other 3 years, it amounts to a 9.2% rise in members' allowances.
That is simply a budget assumption. It will, any decisions to increase members' allowances will have to be taken by the education. So all I have simply done for members' allowance at this point in time is reflecting the same assumption as the staff pay one. We would expect there would be some uplift for inflation in future years at some point. But this budget is not making that decision. It has to be set by the independent remuneration panel's recommendations to the executive board. The mayor's allowance is fixed.
And the process by that is the executive board has to vote to accept the independent process. Correct. The third point was on, again, the operation costs. It's a minor point, but again, we're projecting a rise of sort of £57,000 in travel and subsistence costs for the combined authority. Is that a reflection directly of the staffing costs you'll have, or will that be going towards the mayor's travel and subsistence?
The mayor's travel and subsistence is in the members' allowances and expenses line. It is simply this isn't an exact science, so it's my feeling of, well, based on the percentage increase in staffing costs, we're likely to see that go up £100,000 into the broad envelope. And as I say, we haven't spent that money yet. It's a broad estimate, and we'll monitor it as we move into the financial year, and that will, once we've established the organisation, the staff within it, that will provide us with a much sounder basis for setting a budget beyond that. But it's just a safe plan.
Okay. On the corporate services via SLAs, I understand the basic premise of you needing those for the first couple of years to set those up. I wondered if we are allowing for an employee budget to rise by several million, yet the SLAs stay at a base level through the years projected. If there's any discrepancy there, or if you would anticipate those SLAs wind down as the organisation ramps up, and if you could benchmark that off another combined authority, it would be helpful to share that information.
Yeah, sure. Effectively, the corporate services SLAs, they will be reviewed during 26-27 in terms of the future. What does each side of the SLA want in terms of, do the constituent authorities want to continue to provide those services? So does the combined authority continue to want to buy those services as opposed to appointing its own staff around those services? I've kept them in there as is at the moment, because if we don't have the SLAs, then the staffing budget would have to go up to replace the services provided by those SLAs. So I've kept it there as it stands at the moment. In terms of, I haven't looked at other MCAs, I've got the figures to hand. But yeah, so some of the other combined authorities have multi-million-pound SLA arrangements with constituent councils in their areas, but it really does depend on size and scale. Some of them have established their own significant in-house corporate services.
Okay, thanks for that. On premises, I obviously know there's a £100,000 spent there in, well, frankly, an organisation that has bare bones staffing in them. I wondered if you could sort of describe what the single biggest spend in that area is a year.
It's, well, there's several things within that budget. There's the rent of premises, service charges through those premises, there's utilities, business space. There's also fixtures and fittings, that's within that budget. So there are several items within it. I would say the largest element of that budget is your fixtures and fittings that we've had established, along with the rent for premises. I've kept it at the level it is because you're not going to buy fixtures, fittings, furniture every year. But as the organisation expands, we will have to relook at premises and adequacy of the current sites, because it's becoming clear that the staffing numbers are likely to go beyond that. Have to review that as we move forward. So, yeah. Maybe on the side of improvements and keeping the premises budget as it is, but it may be right that we'll be able to take that down.
Are you saying then the single biggest spend in the premises line is fixtures and fittings?
It's between that and the rent that we pay for similar figures.
The rent you pay for the mayor's office on Bunker Docks, is that correct?
Well, it's the accommodation for essentially.
And what is the accommodation for full organisation?
That's two.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to just draw attention now to the reserve levels. I wondered if you could talk us through the amount of reserves that have been put into this combined authority in the first year compared to what was put in other combined authorities in their inaugural years.
It's, well, we haven't reached the end of our first year. It's important to point that out at this moment in time. The £300,000 in the general reserve was 24-25. You know, we've had £500,000 funding to largely spent. We will need to review that level going forward. In terms of a general reserve, I'd say we need to have it somewhere around 5% of the operational budget as a general reserve, and as the operational budget goes up, we'll have to review that. At the moment, I haven't got comprehensive information on levels of reserves across other private authorities, and it's largely, it's not very meaningful at the moment because of the huge variations in the size of combined authorities and the students that get it. So it's important that I use my professional experience and judgment to come with the level that I think in terms of the risk that we're facing and the operational costs that we keep us at safe level. But given the funding that we've had in that we haven't yet spent, I'm content that we move into 26, 27 in a safe manner. We will review that again during 26, 27 as we actually start to get all the out the door, as it were. To make sure that we have enough to fall back on if things don't go to plan.
Thank you for that. And then just in light of recent events, and I don't expect a particularly stunning answer on this, is there any thinking around seed funding for the rail electrification plans that were made, that were sort of rode back on by the mayor or by the executive board this time?
Can the executive board definitely didn't roll back on the electrification, just to put that in the.
Sorry, the government.
And neither did, thank you.
Yeah. Is there a plan for that there?
Well, these are the types of issues that will be developed in terms of where you see those investments there. as we develop our plans to spend the money within that investment program and all those different costs, that's where that. But there's no specific budget for below those numbers for anything at the moment. Still working out the operational delivery plans and the deployment of those funds. So we're looking at specific budget for that, if what is needed, we'll be there to do so.
Okay, that is reassuring. And the last thing from me, and thank you for everyone's patience this time round, is on sort of 6.1, 6.2, and actually the whole sort of paper really, that there's very little mention of private sector investment throughout the entire paper. I wondered if there was scope to change that, or if there'd been any sort of conversations with the mayor around what private sector level investment he expects to draw into a number of these schemes, because, well, it's fine him having lots of money allocated to lots of different budget lines, but there is a certain untapped potential, particularly in lots of different businesses that we've seen from other successful combined authorities, and the omission there is quite striking. I wondered if you could just comment on that.
Can't build a budget on numbers that haven't emerged yet, are subject to future decisions, and you know, those plans will be brought to the table and evolve in the future. And at that point, if we are in an arrangement with contributions from the private sector, then those will be developed into more specific capital schemes. So on page 19, where I've just simply said deployment of those investment funds, that's because we need to develop the investment program into specific programs that work with those schemes. As we do that, and as those investments are brought forward to investment panel and to executive board, those contributions will be made clear, budgets will be built on that basis. I would certainly expect where we are investing in, for example, infrastructure that's going to benefit the private sector, on match funding from the private sector, because we're in business of providing subsidy to private sector organisations. If we're in place, which is going to, as well as support local jobs, of course, generate profits for the private sector,
Yeah, that makes total sense.
Sorry, councillors, before you come back, and apologies, councillor Handley, I do realise I'm somewhat putting you on the spot here, and you're actually here with Steve because you're quite simply early for the next item. But truth be told, if I had an inward investment question of all the people here and actually anywhere in the county ask, it'd be you. And I didn't know if there was anything you wanted to weigh in on, just on that.
Well, just to that is my portfolio investment.
Good.
And I can stand quite happy on the platform from an East Riding perspective and tell you that we have got huge investments, as I'm sure you're aware. It's my job to go out and find investment. It's my job to bring those people to the table. And you want my absolute assurance that that is, and I will be doing that. We've got some fantastic investments in the East Riding, and nobody's seen. However, with my investment house fund for the NCA, quite honestly, if the investments come into form, I'm as excited as I am for the investment into East Riding, at the end of the day, it's for the region, it's for jobs, it's for our community. So yes, at the moment we are working through the pipeline, I've got to be honest with you, so I can't give you any definite anything at the moment. But I don't believe in giving them away because I'm a Yorkshireman.
We're in safe hands then, Chair.
Indeed and agreed, thank you. Was there anything further, councillor Innes?
I think that is it for now. Thank you.
If anything sparks your fancy, then please do as councillor Cousins just did and give me a wiggle. Speaking of which, councillor Cousins, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. It was a very similar question that I was going to ask, and I sort of mentioned in the pre-meeting as well, was around external investment and private sector investment. Obviously, virtually all the funding here is public money that's coming in that may expand as we move forward and the organisation is successful. I was wondering if there was any benchmarking showing private sector investment in more established combined authorities.
I don't have any numbers to hand, but
ultimately, I think that's something that could either be brought back to this committee. And as I say, if we look at our work programme, when we look at the game plan, that's definitely going to be an element of that. And we do have our briefing on the game plan next month. We also, if you'll excuse me while I scroll, we also have the Get Britain working plan, and I imagine that will be quite a significant part of that. And that will be in our briefing in April. So I'd suggest probably Julian isn't best placed to answer that. But if Dennis, Councillor Healy, if you also wants to ask a question, please.
Yeah, I think, again, the premise of the combined authority was very much around inward investment as well. And looking, I mean, there are other, I mean, I'm thinking of, Tees Valley. And there's been investments there. So there must be some good practice examples, because we need to hold those up, because we always said, the mayor needs to be the person who's the go-to person for investment. And it's still early days, but seeing some successful inward investments that as a result of the mayor will combine authority, rather than as opposed to a very successful trial, which it's there, it speaks for itself. But what can we pin on this authority as being a success in the way that other authorities may have achieved it? Would be good to see and have a bit of a benchmark case study.
For me, it just gives a target to shoot at. And that we can see, where we might be, and that would also help with the fact that inward investment is paying for operating costs.
Well, could I suggest then, members, that a briefing note might be the simplest solution to this. However, with already being January, with our next year's work programme beginning in May, with this, as Councillor Healy's just eloquently described, it being a big part of what the responsibility of the authority is, most likely going to be one or multiple agenda items for future meetings. Would it be, and again, I'm happy to be guided by members on this, would it be prudent to have a briefing note in the interim, or to see the exact points that have just been raised as an element of the agenda and the paperwork, as and when this comes as a substantive item? Any thoughts?
I think a briefing note is probably acceptable in the short term.
A briefing note, just to keep us tied over. We wouldn't want to get bored now, gents. And also on that note, I think it'd probably be fair to say, Councillor Handley, in short as well, the conversation is revolved around whatever you've been doing, keep doing it, and if possible, more. No pressure. Thank you. So thank you, Councillors Cousins and Healy, thank you. And thank you, Councillor Murray, who was almost as patient as Councillor Haynes.
It was until I started hearing the questions I'd prepared and planned being asked, but
well, we've had nine.
Take turns next time.
We've
end up first.
had 9 questions so far, and 5 of them have been wiggled. I do like to keep it organic, but over to you, Councillor Murray.
Okay, yeah, it was just first of all, I'm going to start back. I appreciate the life cycle of this organisation and how much is an assumption, how much is an estimate, how much are you looking at, the models and what have you. So I'm going to start by getting that in straight away. But just coming on the back of the thing about the service level agreements, when I first saw that employee cost increase, I imagined that would be based on a certain sort of level understanding, not just about what other people are doing, but what our people will be doing and what the jobs will be. Therefore, we have some sort of idea about what we don't need to bring in through service level agreements. And when you answered the question, I don't know if it was just the way you said it, but you said about asking the constituent authorities. To me, that the only thing we should be doing is trying to get whatever service that is, either in-house or via them, based on how much it costs us, how much we can save. I think that should be the underlying principle. If we have an organisation that can't do that, I'd be slightly worried about that anyway. But obviously, if it's going to save us a lot of money by doing these SLAs, then that should be fine. But I don't think that's more of a negotiation than a consultation with those, other constituent authorities. The other point I wanted to make was obviously because there's no sort of autonomous funding streams, even though those will be available obviously through legislation and what have you, if that's commercial or preset or whatever the case may be, then there is a massive risk to the organisation. And essentially, we've heard about the example of some of these organisations who need cash. We've got some sat in reserves. I don't see why necessarily we couldn't give them like a 3-month settlement to keep those services going, because actually that means delivery is stopping. And we're in a position, we're meant to be promoting delivery and getting stuff delivered. Stuff can be delivered, but it will be stopping because we're not intervening. And I just considering essentially the whole organisation is surviving currently on grants, you're already getting to a point where that should be spent on services already being spent on bureaucracy. And hopefully you'll get to a point where there's a net gain, you know, for that, for the people on the street. But I just wondered, has there been any discussion whatsoever in the senior leadership team or with the mayor about other funding sources becoming more autonomous?
And with your first point, in terms of SLAs, it absolutely is a negotiation, and that's what we're at the moment. This, I don't want to give the impression from what I said previously that this is in any way, oh, well, we'll see to the right of this. That's not where we are. We want value for money. We want efficient local government. We want to do this as cheaply as possible for the combined authority and the residents, the local community, whilst making sure that it's delivering the quality that it should be. So I can give an example. So one of the SLAs with East Riding Yorkshire Council is with my team at East Riding to deliver a finance service. Now, the combined authority will start to appoint its own finance staff, but that they, in terms of the local government expertise, they can be quite hard to come by. So we have to produce and publish at HEYCA a set of annual accounts following the end of March. Now, HEYCA's not going to have the staff to do that. It's a significant piece of work. So the East Riding team will be picking it up. But it depends how HEYCA develops its finance staff and appoints to a finance team during 26-27 as to whether it's going to continue to rely on East Riding for that service going forward, or is happy to that it's in a position to do that itself. So it's that kind of specialist work where until HEYCA has the assurance that it can access the skills and resources it needs appointed in-house, that it needs that assurance before it can step away from that support from the constituent councils. But there is, like you say, there is a negotiation process to be undertaken.
So sorry, Chair. While you're on that floor, I'm going to wiggle myself if that's possible. We'll find a way. How is it? Still a question, but whatever. Is it normal then that there's been no projected change other than inflation for the SLAs? Or is that literally, I'm going to give you an out, is that just because of how early we are in the process?
Yeah, it's not a silly question whatsoever. And yes, all I have assumed is inflation anyway. But those, this is why I emphasised right at the start, the amount of volatility we might see in these figures. It's a planning basis going forward. I think it's a sound planning basis as we move into the financial year, but the outlook for the next financial year and beyond that may change significantly by the end of this calendar year. We may be looking at a completely different set of numbers. So it's just being conscious of that. And your other question was about leveraging other funding in. I mean, it really is around the discussion that we had previously in terms of day-to-day operation of the authority and its revenue budget. What we're not going to see there is funding coming in from other sources unless there was any decision to levy taxation locally. And there has been no conversation at the moment around proposals to do that. Just to reassure you there, and all of that will be subject to consultation and executive board decision. But we're not proposing a budget or financial plan for 26-27 that contains those issues. It's really on the capital project side where we're developing the infrastructure that facilitates local economic growth, where we would expect to see the private sector around the table and contributing to that whole lot of. So there's certainly been those sorts of conversations. There's been active ongoing conversations with with developers locally around what our plans might be in the future, what their plans might be. But that's the extent of the moment. But I'm sure as the organisation becomes fully established, there'll be much stronger links built across the East Riding between both public sector organisations, the private sector and the third sector around it. Because it's about place, it's about everyone together in partnership and what we can all bring to the table. So that's where we need to be.
You can tell Julian's been head of finance at East Riding for a while, because instead of MCA, the phrase East Riding slipped out there. But
Sorry.
of course, we can never forget our friends in Hull, and we would hope they'd never forget us. But no, thank you, Councillor Murray. And I have got a bit of a recommendation there. I've also worked in with the points from Councillors Hale and Waring earlier. So do you want to come back on anything else there?
Only just be think very carefully before I speak.
And then teach me how to.
It would be a really shame if we end up with a great organisation that eats its own. It eats its own money, and then we're not getting delivery, and because of like fear or whatever around funding it in different ways, that we don't maximise that. I just think it's. I worry about it, Chair. That's it.
Look, that shows you in the right room. You've got the scrutiny hats on and the public servant one of that. So you're right man for the job.
Absolutely.
So thank you. So my last two questions then are from Councillor Hale and from Councillor Haynes as well. So Councillor Hale, over to you.
You might cross over as a visit. I mean, just to put it in perspective, the SLAs do worry me a bit. I mean, I chaired the council arms length building company. The first thing I did was we sacked the council's lawyers, the HR, the occupational health and finance and building cleaning, on the basis they couldn't even tell us how they worked out their overhead, because effectively it was just basically overhead offsetting on behalf of the local authority. That's what they do. We sacked IT and then they halved the bill and we went back to them. It struck me that they just made it out with the stroke of a pen. So, I mean, what you have to remember is that we're wearing two hats here. But any authority offering you something is going to want to offset their overhead. That's why we always want to be the accountable body. But it means that they pay for some of our staff, and it goes without saying. So there's no wrong in that. That's the reality of the beast. You know,
It's charging the tenant more than the mortgage.
Absolutely. But then that comes back onto something Councillor Haynes sort of touched on. I think I didn't labour it because we've given the assurance that we would, that report, because we weren't set up, wasn't subject to pre-scrutiny around accommodation. But there was a report into accommodation that reviewed the pros and cons of making the decisions that they made regarding principally the Marina Court or whatever. Well, that's fine, because if it's there and it's transparent, it actually probably helps the executive board that we are shared with that, so we can see that they did show due diligence and decision making. But I think we need that, because I would want to know why a decision to rent, not to buy, was made. The last police commissioner, bar two, I think, stupidly sold their headquarters back to us at City Council. We couldn't wait to write the check for £350,000 for a building that they paid £600,000 2 years before to save money. But that meant that we owned a building, which was potentially, I understand, for this process up for rent. But so if we are paying, I don't know what we're paying, but if we're paying 50, 60, 70 grand for Marina Court, whatever it is, I don't know till I've seen the report. I want to know why a decision to rent, not to buy, was made, because I'm sure the East Riding or ourselves have got lots of surplus property knocking around that they would have done a deal with the combined authority, because it would. So I want to know the rationale for why we decided to rent, not buy. I would always buy, not to me, because of, it's just the way it's just. Don't worry, when I was at Co-op Regional Board, I said exactly the same. Buy your shops, don't rent them, but it's a separate debate. But what I would say on this was, I want to know, I would like to see that paper, but then perhaps it might be difficult because East Riding's got some sort of tie-up in this building. I don't know why we come here. I don't know why we're not asking the local authorities why we can't have a building in County Hold or a building that might charge you for a cup of tea. It won't be more than, I'm not sure they didn't charge you accommodation, because there must be a cost for officers coming here, even if members don't claim. And there must be a cost in getting here in you know, be an hour and a half on the bus if you had to try and find one city centre or two or whatever. So I don't know what the tie up of the rental costs are here. I'm sure it's probably helping an overhead somewhere in paying, but I'd want to see that granular detail around all the premises accommodation costs. It might make me doubting Thomas. You might blow all my concerns out the water overnight, but I'd like to see that for that reason. As following, I think Councillor Haynes had said that, so I don't really need a recommendation because I think at the pre-meeting it was inferred that we are entitled to that information, and if we had that information, Jack would have had to ask all the questions about how much is this, how much is that. So that's the first thing I'll say.
We did receive the exempt reports today, actually, after raised by Councillor Haynes on Monday.
Well, I haven't been back in the office yet, so I apologise if we have. I've not been
Actually, your question still bears fruit and has prudence, Councillor Hale, at least in my mind, because it is a more complicated picture when you actually look at it from a nitty-gritty point of view. If you have one mayor covering 2 council areas and they set up shop in Guildhall, you'll have some very upset people in the East Riding.
Not saying Guildhall, I'm saying there's lots of property. I'm sure over the Hull and East Riding we both own that one of them could have.
And similarly vice versa. And so you then start to look at the ancillary properties. But there's also the element of the meetings as well. There's actually the staff and the running of the organisation on a day-to-day basis. But as you rightly pointed out, there's all of us coming together and meeting as well. So there's elements and layers.
Just following that point, surely you'd buy a place that we could meet at.
Well,
or
then,
rent a place
if I could,
rather than.
if I could quote Julian rather than putting words in his mouth when he said earlier that the chances are that they could actually expand beyond the current office provision in terms of as they grow. That in turn would mean that, and again, I don't know the answer to this. I'm posing the thought exercise here. Is it that you rent in the short term and look to buy in the long term? And is it that you wait to look to buy until you know what you need to buy? Is that the reasoning?
Right, okay,
the point is we don't know.
But let's look at the report and then we might raise that again. But what I would say to you then, I know when the police authority bought the police authority headquarters, one of the reasons it did so was it had enough space for them all to meet in that building, which made eminent sense that you've got headquarters that everyone's based at, but it's also the building you can meet in. So I mean, there's a separate issue, but I mean, I would say the other thing I would say, Shane made a good point, which was that if there's an issue about process and setting up the machinery to administer those post UK SPF bids, with that level of reserve, you could, in a sense, oil the wheels for 3 months while you're making more informed decisions and take some uncertainty out. I just put that out there because Shane made a really good point that I hadn't thought of. And I have the formal words that I was given to come back to you and say that this scrutiny committee urgently seeks assurance that the February Executive Board will make decisions regarding grant-funded programmes previously funded by UK SPF. And that the HEYCA board, the HEYCA Executive Board communicates these decisions urgently, given that significant staff of the VCS in Hull are at risk of redundancy. It's a reasonable.
Well, thank you, Councillor Owen.
You can take a bomb of that. Or look at
well, we have spent an hour and a half on this, and I wasn't any rush, especially because in our next agenda item, it's the second half of what we discussed last time, and this is the budget. It covers literally everything, and it's all about the money. That's the important stuff. So I wasn't in any desire to hurry us, but I have Councillor Gallant and Councillor Healy with Wiggles, then Councillor Haynes to finish us off. Then we'll have a quick break and come back in for the local growth plan. So Councillor
Collins, you had down to start with, I've only contributed my wiggle.
Oh, right. Apologies, Councillor.
I'm still waiting on my substantive.
I believed when you introduced yourself that you were bringing your question forward as a wiggle.
Yeah, one of them, yes, but a couple of other.
In that case, then Councillors Gallant, Healy, Haynes, Collinson, and then we'll call it for this item.
Leaving at 4 o'clock, I have another appointment. I was asked to come here from 1500 to 1600 hours. I just have not got the time.
Right.
Sorry.
Well, in that case, if you can't do it in an hour and 30 minutes, you can't do it in an hour and 40. 2 sentences, chaps, please.
Yeah.
Go.
Yeah. Well, very briefly, I was going to say, Julian's already outlined that we're probably going to expand beyond the space that we've rented. So, plus, if we bought an office block in the first year, that would have been a huge amount of the first year's funding sunk into a capital. Maybe a good long-term investment, but probably not in year one. So we know how many people we are going to have, etc. So that's my observation on that question. I think Dennis was.
So, Councillor Healy, please.
So just on the origin of that decision, I mean, the decision around the premises was taken as an exempt item at the executive board in July, before this scrutiny committee was go, but we had to leave the room at that time. I was in the room, but I had to leave it. So I think that's probably one of the reasons. There's not been any clarity. We weren't around. Whether that should have been taken as an exempt decision, as an exempt item, I don't know. But just for members' benefit, that was the provenance of that kind of decision.
Well, thank you, Councillor Healy. And Councillors Haynes and Constable, you are the last two, but I'm conscious that we are running out of time. Are your questions quick and able to be asked now, or would you like to do them in writing after the meeting?
Very quick, if I may, and it's just to the sort of the officers who might answer this. It's just very simply, has the mayor ever asked for the community investment fund to be put in future years' budget lines?
No, that's not.
No.
No, that's not what we've been done.
He's never asked for.
He's talked about what his ambitions are, but he's not specifically instructed them to be brought into.
Thank you.
But it's not been discussed by the board either. So Councillor Collinson, please, final word to you.
Mayoral election costs are estimated to be 1.5 million. They cost 1.4 million this time. I mean, are we not combining them? Are we not holding them the first week of May? That would cut expense, wouldn't it? And is the inaugural event not more expensive than the future ones once you've got going?
I mean, that is a year full amount. It's way out there. It's just, it will be assessed near the time, but it's just to really recognise in the 4-year plan, the another election needs to be paid for from resources. So it's just putting a flag in the year 4 level, but it will be developed. There may be other elections going on at the same time, which means there might be cost efficiencies on that, but yeah, but it's done.
I would hope so. And on the Great Britain work in here, aiming for an 80% employment rate. What is the current employment rate?
Get Britain working is a future agenda item for us, I believe, Councillor Collins. So I don't think we'll be able to get that data here today.
All right, then. I mean, I think it'd probably be helpful if we have sort of comparative figures. If it says in things like this, the current rate is doodah, and people like me.
We have Anita Holbrook presenting to the committee in April at the briefing on Get Britain Working. So I will ask Gabriella and Cutler to make a note of that, make sure they have comparative figures there in terms of where we are and where we're going.
Yeah, all right. Thank you, Phil.
Thank you. So, very briefly then, flicking through the recommendations. So to seek and stress urgency on decision-making and deployment of funding, to propose a ratio and potentially a cap on on proportional funding allocated to operational costs and a preference toward internal staffing over subcontractors and SLAs, which I think has been an ethos that's been expressed. I might have been reading between the lines a bit there.
I think that could mean that in local government land, an urgent decision for 6 months. So I'm asking that we ask the executive board to make a decision regarding in February, at the February meeting, regarding those funds that used to be funded by the UK SPF, given the risks to employees.
Well, we started there and we finished there. So can we come back to that and also the specific wording of your?
Oh, right. I thought you were paraphrasing.
I'm doing them chronologically. Sorry, Councillor.
No,
So quarterly budget updates to be provided to this scrutiny committee in line with the work given to audits. Publication of decisions relating to operational costs and an articulation of this to the public. I'd suggest that we also as a committee take assurance from the prudence that has been exhibited and actually, to be fair, offer thanks to Julian for the high level of detail that has been provided. I don't think you've answered any questions with one-word answers. I think it's fair to commend you and recognise that. A briefing note on the MCA comparison, which was mentioned by Councillor Cousins, and the ambitions, which was mentioned by Councillor Healy, relating towards inward investments. And to make sure that we're aware of what others are doing and also what we want to be doing as a committee to keep on top of what is a very significant element of this organisation's responsibility and remit. And then I've written down here in regards to Councillor McMurray's suggestion, delivery of interim support, actually indeed Councillor Waring as well, delivery of interim support to prevent the halting of provision. And then off the back of that, there was Councillor Hale's recommendation. And for the benefit of our viewers on YouTube and Poppy in the minutes, if you can share that.
And give us to Poppy afterwards, actually, you want.
And you have already read it, to be fair, so that would be helpful. Thank you. And then the last one is the policy on premises, whether it's offices, whether it's for meetings. I think if we make that as a recommendation to be brought to our work programme for discussion of this committee as a future agenda item, just to make sure that we're actually aware of what the office wants to call its home and what business it wants to do there. So if we're all happy with that, if we could, Councillor
Can I put
Haynes,
forward a final recommendation?
Please.
I am new to this, but it does seem remiss that the mayor is not actually here to have questions on his own financial plan. Can we recommend that in future years the mayor attends meetings of such importance?
This is the first meeting that the mayor has missed, and it's because he was in two places at once. I believe it's with the ICB and the Integrated Care Board and Health Partners today. At least that's what LinkedIn's been telling me. But no, this is the first meeting that the mayor has missed, and it's the third meeting of this committee. And it was something that was not only stressed in the first meeting, but we had a specific agenda item just simply to fire questions at him, just for the fun of it. After all, you've got to keep us as public servants on our toes. But no, I can assure you, Councillor Haynes, that the mayor does attend this committee religiously, take it seriously, and indeed has thanked us for the effort we've put in. Sorry?
He's been once,
Been twice.
twice, and he left after the question. And the thing that we had downstairs, he was here for half an hour and went.
Well, just on the regards to the scrutiny committee, he's come for his agenda items and left after them.
Yes.
If we'd like more out of him, I'm happy to see the committee furnished with a cattle prod, but you will have to find out which part of the budget Julian gets the money for that from. Anyway, with 20 minutes until Councillor Hanley's got to go and lots of questions for her, could I suggest we have a 3-minute break and then we all reconvene? That'd be all right.
Thanks.
Stop by starting with an apology to Councillor Handley. In the first, an apology to Councillor Handley. In the first meeting of this committee, I did say we're job and knock. If it's an easy agenda, we go home early. If it's a long one, we go home late. But we've got a job to do and we do it. I apologise, Councillor Handley. This is your first time gracing us with your presence. So over to you, please.
Chair, if I may, before I go on to talk about the local growth plan, I would like to do my very best for Councillor HEYCA and the VCSE. I absolutely salute the VCSE. Without them, we would be lost. So you have my absolute assurance, Councillor Hale, that I will do my utmost to make sure our VCSE is at the top of the agenda and looked after. They do a great job and they need applauding for what they do. And I also know HL. I see and others that you've got in Port City and also East Riding do a wonderful job. So I just want to reassure you that I will take that on board.
Thank you.
So thank you very much, everybody. So the local growth plan, I'm sorry I can't spend loads of time with you, but I do have to my right the expert in the field. So these local growth, as a portfolio hold for investment, I'm actually bringing this to you today because it does affect every part of the combined authority and what we're and the work that we need to do. So clearly bringing investment into the HEYCA is one of the main things that we are about. And it is central to what we do. And we have to back industry, back local businesses and SMEs, make sure people can access good jobs and put in place infrastructure we need to grow and complete, not just nationally, but internationally. So the local growth plan is the priority for the combined authority, and we've worked really quickly on this. We've listened to all your feedback, and we've obviously, that's in the appendix that you've seen, we've listened to what you've had to say. We've also listened to business. So in February, we are going to bring to this scrutiny the full local growth plan, so we can actually take it to pieces and spend more time looking at it and again getting your feedback. So that's me really where we're at. You've already seen it once. This is the second iteration. So any questions, feedback that we may have, I'm more than happy to take on board and take away and answer anything that I can. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Handley. Steve, is there anything you wish to add at this juncture, or do you want to jump straight into questions?
The only thing I would say is to note there's a duplication in Appendix 1. Apologies. We'll get those the actual words circulated to you in relation to your comment on protection of key sectors, where we've copied the words from the row above. And then secondly, in recent work, we have deviated from the outline structure, which is set out in section 5, from memory section 6, in the drafting, in order to basically make the plan more accessible. So all the content is there, but it won't look like that structure when you see it in a few weeks. But other than that, made it stands, and given time constraints, I won't say anything.
Thank you very much. And actually, Steve, you've just set me up perfectly. And Councillor Handley alluded to it too. This is the second time we're seeing this, and I think that actually shows the significance of it. But what I would say is that the last meeting was very esoteric, very blue sky thinking, and that is all reflected in Appendix 1. There was the committee's thoughts, considerations, a wish list, if you will. So to paraphrase Elvis, we've done the conversation, now it's time for the action. So moving on to questions, Councillor Bibb, you were the first one to put your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, my question's regarding Appendix 2 about the online survey. I mean, I was very disappointed to see it's only a total of 59 responses received. So going forward, can we look at online surveys which actually cut through and get out to people, so they actually make an effort to fill them in, because 59 people out of 600,000 people that know the Australians in the poor. Sorry, I don't like to be critical, but I think that's something you need to look at.
Steve, please tell us about stakeholders.
So, I mean, yes, it is a small number in terms of residents. The makeup of those responses are almost all networks, organisations, businesses, stakeholder movements, which is where we targeted this area. So I kind of just make that distinction in the nature of the plan was one that was more attuned to feedback from those groups than perhaps from residents facing survey. But you know, that said, I would like more responses than more in future. So yeah.
Councillor Bibb, could I ask a favour of you then, please? Could you think on wording for recommendation in terms of lessons learned from this and future engagement approaches? Thank you very much. So Councillor Hale was next, but Councillor Collinson, who was incredibly patient last time, mainly because I forgot him, has actually asked for a wiggle. So Councillor Collinson, please.
No, just to endorse that point, really, Chair, 59 responses isn't very many at all. And, you know, the number of businesses in the area is not substantial, the number of organisations. We ought to be better than 59 responses. In fact, I would say it's essential. You're going to engage with all the people we're talking about engaging with.
Well, thank you very much, Councillor. So I think a lessons learned and a strategy.
It was my,
So
it was
Councillor
my, I mean, I did make the same point Councillor Bibb made at the, our read through pre-meeting, exactly that point, and I was told that it was mainly organisations. I still therefore don't know what a good response, back to your point, I don't really know what a good response from organisations would look like. But if this is going to be used perhaps a very low baseline going forward, I think we need to make sure that we are, and if we're inviting individual responses as well. So I wouldn't even want to, I'd say it's an organisation response or it's a everybody response, because otherwise you are going to get one or two people and not some organisations. So I do absolutely concur with the points made by my two colleagues. The only other point, which might seem a small point, but isn't to me, and that's the 11 of 13 that we talked about. And you have mentioned it already, Chair. There has been quite a few discussions of the East Riding today when it was supposed to be the Hull and East Yorkshire Combined Authority. That paragraph doesn't mention cities, and I know it's probably the assumption is it's cities plus, but don't forget the rest of us. But I want to remind people that, you know, many of us, you know, represent urban areas, both in the East Riding and in the city. And, you know, I would also, not to misquote Merkel House times, cities are the dynamo of the dynamos of civilization, aren't they? So I want to make sure that we don't forget cities. And every time I see a paragraph without cities and urban areas mentioned, I will draw your attention to it. Whether it's on bus journeys, whether it's on scarcity or bus routes or here, it's going to be the same.
Well, I think as a scrutiny committee, we have been consistent in desiring an ethos, and whether it's cities and rural, whether it's urban and rural, whether it's deprivation and isolation, we've always wanted to see both sides of the coin expressed at every point, not least because we want to see that ingrained, and from a scrutiny perspective, we want that consistency. And I would also add, as a Brough resident and soon to be a city, the way things are going, I'd sit there in your camp as well, Councillor.
And I'm going to make a point, and I mean, if he was here, I'd feed it back to his face. He wasn't here today, so I can't. And that was that I did notice Mayor Campbell's response to the announcement of electrification, which was on where he alluded to the fact that he was supporting Councillor Handley. But there's no mention of Hull at all. No mention that obviously the railway station last time Gary drove a train there, stopped in Hull. And I just thought it looked like it was the Mayor of the East Riding were of one view, And I absolutely know, because he said so last Thursday when we were all in agreement with Hull, Councillor Ross was certainly on that page, but he wasn't even mentioned in that video. So again, it's just this, it's just a plea to the combined authorities to that when we do comms at either at mayor level, that is the whole area and not just bits of it.
I think we've stretched the remit of the agenda here, but I think the point still stands. And as you rightly pointed out, there was articles in the press and announcement from Councillor Ross, and there was articles in the press and announcements from the mayor and from Councillor Handley. And I think the key element here is coordination. It goes back to Councillor Handley's introduction, but actually this has to tie across everything, and a win for one is a win for all. And so I don't know how to phrase that in a recommendation, so I'll give you homework as well, Councillor Hale. But coordination is something that I think we want to see embodied across the wider mayoral area as something that's just become apparent here. So thank you, Councillor Hale. Councillor Haynes, you were next.
Yeah, two things. Firstly, the thing that everyone is talking about is the level of responses. Now, I have the privilege of being the portfolio holder for that comes under consultation of the council. When you say 59 responses were received and don't give a barometer for the target audience or present any statistical evidence by percentage on which you found that base, it doesn't feel like a very robust consultation at all. I wondered if you could provide here in the room today a percentage of the target audience you were looking to communicate with through that consultation process.
Yeah, so I think it's a qualitative assessment, not quantitative. So I wouldn't get numbers on it. We wanted to hear from business representative groups, big academic institutions like the university, sector groups like the Holdings Yorkshire, Chamber, FSB, General Business Representative Bodies, as well as large employers and small employers in the region. And that's exactly who we heard from, which is not a surprise because that's who we worked with to generate those responses. I should say as well, around about 40% responses from voluntary community sector organisations as well. But as I said, it's because we asked the Chamber to circulate the link, we asked the FSB, we went straight to some people, we worked with the bond sector leaders to do that. So that reflects exactly the mix we were in.
Can you circulate the list of respondents off agenda? Members of scrutiny.
I can just simply on data sharing what we asked and what we told people we do with their data. I can certainly give you the breakdown of the types of organisations that responded.
Yeah.
We asked people specifically, are you happy for us to contact you and share your data? Some said yeah. So
that's helpful. And just using my newness to this meeting on Appendix 2, you mentioned this sort of cross-cutting big player strategy. I wonder if you could explain to me what a big play is.
Essentially a project. So when you see the plan in full, that's kind of the structure of the plan, the kind of the priorities that it puts forward. It's I guess it's language drawn from the game plan, if you like. So it kind of these things can be awfully dull to read. Everyone's had a mission, a priority, a vision, an objective, a goal. We thought we tried to be slightly.
Okay.
Who said long-winded documents can't be sexy?
I will be like
Everyone.
Well, thank you very much, Councillor Haynes. Councillor Haynes, you were next, please.
Yeah, I think on the subject of, phrases that should be here, big play, interesting, but I'd like to see something like major win. So, what is it that what is going to be that big investment that's going to be coming in that we can hang our hat that says this is down to the mayor and combined authority? Unlike the one in Gould, it wasn't down to riding and an investment team there. So that would be one. I suppose the question I was going to ask though, what's the next steps? When are we going to see the final version of this revealed in all its glory, so that we can, have something to move forward on?
Yeah, so the final version of the actual growth plan will be coming in February. That will be ready for circulation then, Councillor Healy. There are quite a lot of different proposals have been put in the investment pipeline that has happened from both Hull City Council and East Riding Council of what they would like to see. That is currently being worked through with the officers. It will then come to the, as me as the chair, the investment board for us to have a look at. And then we will make recommendations up to the main board. Now, I have myself asked for some very quick things that we can actually get off the ground and running. So I would like to see that as a matter of urgency, along with a couple of maybe bigger projects that we need extra planning and let's not forget biodiversity net gain, can't forget that one. And everything else that goes with that. So there should be some bigger ones, a couple of those, but some smaller ones that we can get behind and say, this is what we have to do. And that will be through very, very, very.
We get that to scrutinise.
Well, as you know, Councillor, I always try to write down recommendations as people bring them up. I don't like to see anything missed. And similarly, apologies. I'll have a chat with Poppy afterwards. I forgot to ask her after the last item if there was anything I had missed in the recommendations, but we'll get the logistics done there later. On this one, I was writing down a briefing note post-February and to include recommendations from the investment board to the exec board. Ultimately, that will be a paper that is presented to the board. And so rather than duplicate work or basically represent the exact same thing in a different way, could I specifically that the board papers be sent to the members of this committee as well proactively? And therefore enable us to get the information as you've just described, Councillor Handley, in the way Councillor Healy suggested that we would need it.
Can I just caveat? I mean, obviously, it's one of the recommendations here to agree to further scrutinise the final draft of the local growth plan and its consideration by the HEYCA board. There will be some things that will be on being discussed for investment that actually will have to be not for public.
Of course.
Consumption, because we can't do that,
Commercial sensitivity.
Absolutely, we will have that, so I can't bring everything, because that wouldn't be fair for that very reason. But the local growth plan is up to you to scrutinise, absolutely, but the actual investment pipeline will be commercial beyond what we have three papers.
What I'd say there, Councillor, is we've just debated the staffing structure and the amounts of people we need to do the job. What I wouldn't want to see is a burdening of our staff to provide that extra information. It does say in the potential recommendations to further scrutinise this. This is the second time we've scrutinised this very document in as many months. And what I don't want to do is see this taking the limelight away from other things. We must be balanced in our approach. And so before I bring Councillor Halen on a wiggle, if I could ask a question myself, and that is, did you find there to be any value, to be any merit in Appendix 1? And will that help actually fuel the discussions held by the board? In short, all the discussion points from our last meeting, is that something that we can help steer the decision making and hopefully, as was highlighted earlier as well, speed along the process?
Absolutely, because we're all in this together. We're all working towards the greater good and we're all in it as one. That's what we are. We are HEYCA and we have to look after our region. So any help, support that anybody wants to give is more than welcome, absolutely more than welcome, and will be taken on board and will be worked through.
Well, very much appreciated. Thank you. So, Councillor Henry, was there anything else on this point while you still have the mic for Councillor? Thank you, Councillor. And Councillor Hale, please.
Well, Councillor Hanley's response there, was obviously clarification really, was she said that there might be things you can't bring because confidentiality. In Hull, I don't know how it works in the driving. In Hull, we still scrutinise them. We scrutinise them in exempt session.
Yeah.
So we're not, scrutiny is never removed from that process.
No.
So I would hope that they can be brought here. We just have to go into exempt session and we need to obviously, I'm sure it is the same as writing on it.
It is, yeah. Well, as I say, we received exempt papers today.
Yeah.
So, Councillor Handley.
Yeah, and actually, I'm just discussing it with Steve, and I was just going to speak to Alan about it. Actually, it's just when we have cabinet meetings and we have exempt items, everybody leaves the room, and it's just the way that it's done. But that's just the way that we do it. So clearly, we don't do it the same as full.
So I mean, obviously, if it was your cabinet, the scrutiny would meet in advance of the cabinet, and those exempt items would be taken there.
No.
They would be taken there and they'd be heard in exempt session. I'm looking at Jack's way we've always done it, it's the way you do it. Yeah.
No, that's not how we do it. If it's commercially sensitive, we're never ever going to do that. It's always a cabinet decision on commercially sensitive things. If we're spending money or we have contracts with where money's discussed, that is commercially sensitive and that is a private conversation. Then we can sorry, no,
It's not exempt, so
no.
it's not exempt from elected councillors who might be,
That's what I meant. So we would scrutinise it.
so we should be able to scrutinise it as council, but not just as council, is that not the case?
I think the straight answer is, it is technically possible to have a scrutiny process on a part of gender, so confidential basis, if you choose to do that.
So,
Yeah.
well, that would be my recommendation, Chair, because and I'm sure my colleagues will.
Yes.
But I don't think there's any objection to seeing it at scrutiny. I think the issue and it is how and how within the realms of legality. It's not about will we or won't we, it's about the right way to do this. And it might be that as a committee, we decide that the briefing process is the way to do it, where we all meet on teams, where we're not in the public eye, but we are doing the function of our public duty. Ultimately, that's what we are. We are representatives. That's what we're there to do.
I would just say on that, Richard, that, you know, the sort of way we have always done these items is a pre-exempt, this exempt report has come to a meeting for us to scrutinise an official capacity, because there are various ways you can undermine the scrutiny process by doing a paper or a briefing in a way that you wouldn't if you were to do an official item that was under an exemption, if you understand where I'm going from. So while they might not seem too different from each other, a scrutiny commission could receive a briefing or a paper and be told this is confidential. They could not necessarily receive an informal chat over Teams and abide by the same legalities. So I just say for the sake of the scrutiny's and the authority's sake, the better way to do it is to have an exempt paper that goes to scrutiny through the proper direction, rather than a briefing of members from various areas, bodies riding different political parties, that is presented as a paper and doesn't have the same constraints around that. I think that on the point of
you want to see investments that we are wanting to put forward. Because if that's what we're talking about, I can assure everybody here, we're just kicking the can down the road, and you want some quick wins. You're not going to get quick wins because we're going to be stuck in meeting after meeting after meeting. Sorry, but that's how I see it. And I'm really sorry.
Well, I mean, Chair, this is why, so someone who worked in Beverley, this is why there was lots of public concern over some of the big developments clearly over the many years in places like Beverley, because people weren't, you know, all sorts of rumour and innuendo can rise from the fact that it's not as transparent even within the member family. And if the councillors of the council are the council, not the officers, and I always remind officers of this, and it should be the same here, that we are in a sense the custodians. So in a sense, if you can't trust us, which is what it comes down to, that's an issue. My view of the world is no, it isn't, because if you're about to make a decision and you call people together on Teams, if they're not interested or they can't make it, they don't turn up. But it's the principle of people having the opportunity to have those decisions. And if it's a decision I disagree with you've made transparently, I will defend it. If it isn't, I would probably join the doubting Thomases who say, well, there might be something going on there if we're all excluded. And I think it's the principle of transparency that I think we're practicing. The last one we did a few weeks ago, we bought 30 houses. We bought 30 council houses or 30 houses to be council houses. It was done, never got out. Absolutely everyone completely trustworthy because, and I tell you what, because we were part of the decision, it made some time. Now, I would hate the idea that those decisions get made without members involved. I really do.
Well, I would suggest I know everybody in this room relatively well, some of you very. The integrity, I believe, is present in this room. I would defend to the hills. I do not believe it can be called into any shadow of any doubt. The question for me is how to do this properly and similarly how to do this efficiently. What we don't want to do is be the stick in the spokes. We want to be the thing that helps the wheels turn. So what I would suggest is that we do make a recommendation that Tony Mahoney is our monitoring officer, works with Alan as our chief exec, works with Steve as the officer lead, and works with Councillor Handley as the portfolio holder to make sure that all the relevant information is provided to scrutiny and that we are enabled to assess it and to determine if we're pulling in the right direction, i.e. the very purpose of scrutiny. I would also add that it does say a potential recommendation in our report is to further scrutinise the local growth plan. That would then make it the third time we did it. So I would suggest that what we look at is the specifics, exactly what Councillor Handley just said there. Let's look at the detail and then get it agreed. so that we can still see it delivered without interruption or delay. But at the same time, we're not going over all ground again either. We're on a journey and I believe we should be looking at it chapter by chapter. To me, what Councillor Hale's just described, what Councillor Healy brought up, is the next chapter. So to me, that's the thing we should look at next, as and when is appropriate. And I would leave that in the hands of Steve and Councillor Handley to bring it to us at the appropriate juncture, post the conversations at the board in February.
Chair, we should always start with the basis that, as you just said, that we trust people around the table, not that we don't trust the people around the table. Now, if you have a process in place and it's shown that that doesn't work, and to use a better phrase, it leaks or it can't be trusted, then you look again. But I mean, I think it's not called for to start from the point of view that somehow scrutiny delays. It enhances, it invigorates the decision model.
Well, I think we're slightly crossing some wires here, Councillor. The point I'm trying to make is that what we want is for scrutiny to be relevant as well. So if we have to coordinate a meeting, and by the time we all get together, the ship has sailed, effectively we're scrutinising something that's now superfluous because the advancement of time has made it irrelevant. We must not only be scrutinising things, as you've rightly pointed out, for diligence and as Councillor Haynes pointed out, but for the sake of due process, but we must also be scrutinising it at the relevant moment in time. And that's why I say I reckon that the best approach is to leave it with Steve, with Councillor Handley, with Alan and with Tony Mahoney as the monitoring officer, to make sure that it is brought to this committee at the appropriate moment, not to delay anything, but also not to be brought to us when our input would be superfluous.
Chair, so I'm really, and I'm trying to have patience about coming back again, but there seems to be a cultural difference between the way that two authorities potentially work. And so I would ask that we're working, as you suggested earlier, on the basis of a greater, a willingness to have that greater level of transparency, not a lesser level of transparency.
Indeed. Well, I think that's something we can all agree on. I don't see any objection around the room.
I just got
Councillor,
really understanding what you just meant by that's the next chapter. Because I think the scrutiny shouldn't slow something down. We're not making decisions. We're just looking and scrutinising. And I don't know whether we're arguing about something all saying the same thing in the end, but
pretty much.
if you mentioned that what Councillor Hales suggested is, and I suggest is for the next chapter, I think all we're saying is that when this information that's been described as confidential, which is about inward investment, comes forward, that it's brought to this scrutiny committee in an exempt sense. And I can't see why that should be a difficulty if it's exempt. And as you say, everybody then is taken.
And Mr. Chair, I think Dennis is absolutely right, because I think what happens is when I was portfolio of economic regen, I'm sure Jack was saying or whatever, you're aware of all sorts of conversations that are going on. But our conversations, if they become goers, real investment plans, then they go to scrutiny. But we're not asking, we want to hear every single conversation you've had with everyone in the last week. We're saying, but when it becomes a live thing, then in a sense, the public will attack public interest, attract public interest. There's a role for us.
Well, what I would point out is that I am not legally trained nor qualified. I am not the monitoring officer, and the monitoring officer is not with us today. What I do not want to do is see this committee to agree to a course of action that can't be delivered on, because that would be at best rather silly. To add clarification as well, the reason why I say it's the next chapter is because our November meeting, in my mind, with a strategic hat on, was the first chapter of this, and we sat down and we went through what we consider to be priorities. And we have the infrastructure requirements, and we discussed transport, and we discussed capacity in the grid. We have economic priorities. We have engagement and accessibility. We have all the resolutions that we brought forward as a committee, and there is 4 pages in Appendix 1. To me, that esoteric blue sky thinking was chapter 1. Today, I would view as chapter 2, and that is that we're looking at the logistics of how best to move forward. The first element of that discussion has been looking at the confidential items, because of course that's the interesting bit that we want to make sure we're doing right. And as Councillor Haynes has highlighted earlier, that we're doing properly as well, with the right elements of transparency and public scrutiny in what is a democracy. And so to me, that is chapter 2. Chapter 3, therefore, by that logic and that progression, is actually looking at the intricacies of the individual elements and their specifics. And so that is the journey that we're on under this inward investment push forward. And so the reason I've described it as chapters 1, 2 and 3 is we are looking at it in stages. I'm trying to make sure that we keep our strategic viewpoint of scrutiny in the same way that when we started with Councillor Bibb's comments about the actual engagement process, from a strategic point of view, are we learning lessons from that to make sure that future engagement is done differently? And I would hope with a greater response. And that's really the message I'm trying to get across here, without getting this committee to directing a very specific course of action that may not be within our gift or may be in breach of whatever regulations that the monitoring officer and legal advice could provide to us. So I hope I've made that clear. With that in mind, if I may, Steve, I'll bring you in.
Just to very briefly give confidence to the committee and assurance on this item, there is no matter in the local growth plan which is exempt or would be in very circumstances of public policy published in full evidence, the whole plan. So that's not an issue in respect to this.
The plan will be, but the delivery may not necessarily be, as Councillor Handley alluded to, there will be commercially sensitive elements.
In the ongoing business of the combined authority.
Yes. And ultimately, we're here to look at the thing over the course of a season rather than on an individual game. So at this point, in what I've referred to as our chapter 2, we have to have that in mind when we make our recommendations and have our discussions. So I think that was the long day is showing, and that was a rather roundabout way of getting to the point where we are basically saying that the recommendation as printed in the agenda that we do further scrutiny is specifically with regard to the elements of future investments, and the actual specificity of them on a case-by-case basis is what we'd like to see as a committee, rather than the overall overarching document. Is that correct, members?
Well, I think the overall, yeah, I mean, the two go together to a certain extent, don't they?
Yeah, I'd like to think that the two do go together.
At some point, the overarching document makes sense, isn't it?
And we've done the first half, we've done the overarching document in the last meeting and this one.
Yeah.
And so it will get more granular as we move forward, I think is the point.
It's an aspiration, sure, because it's a bit vague, but anyway, sorry.
Well, no, Councillor Collinson, actually, you're next on my list, so back to you.
Actually, one question, on page 12, we have a reference into sector priorities. A bullet point, clearer justification and framing of defence within manufacturing. I see the word defence, I think of defence industry, manufacturing armaments. But this could also mean protection of existing manufacturing base. To which should that refer?
It's the defence industry.
The defence industry, yeah. All right, so we want to make more bombs, drop on people. I mean, I'm not necessarily objective. That can probably express more clearly.
I'm very happy to elaborate if it's helpful. Just not sure how much you want to stick to.
Please, Stephen, feel free to do the commercially sensitive bits too.
So very briefly,
I mean, there are certain people that the whole idea makes them a bit nervous. That's
yeah, absolutely. So the previous paper that we brought talked about a 4-sector, 4 priority sectors within manufacturing, specifically looking at life sciences and defence manufacturing. The feedback we've had from the survey is specifically saying that will make sense. We're not quite sure this region really has a defence kind of industry or defence adjacent industry. So the work that we're doing, we'll look at that much more closely. It is essentially about existing manufacturing companies, whether they may be in a position to shift some of their business towards defence.
Well, the word brush brings to my mind, but I mean, I won't comment on, but it was just, I wasn't very clear what that referred to. I didn't actually think it meant defence industry, because it isn't a big local thing anymore, is it really? Except, I mean, in smaller, ancillary manners. Anyway, that's that. The other thing, under 5.4, it talks, under the second bullet point, it talks about on page 3, research and engagement with the industry, including deep dives into identified growth driving sectors to identify what support is most needed for growth. I'm a bit concerned for 2 reasons. I mean, it's not an oxymoron of some kind. Don't know, but anyway, I mean, I know in Hull we've had people all over this sort of thing for decades, quite good. And I'm sure the East Riding's been the same. Are we not in danger of doing something that's already been done in this kind of? Well, I mean, we know basically where our growth, or we should, what's growing, what isn't, where we walk to. I mean, we should be right on top of this already. Do we not just collate what information we already have and go with that?
So we have absolutely made use of what exists. We did need more in terms of the currency of that information and the type of it. So there's some additional work done, but that's not starting from a blank sheet paper.
I mean, deep dives sounds expensive and time consuming to me. and navel gazing.
It's work which is underway and will be concluded very soon, so it's been part of the process.
It's not all that deep then. All right, fine. Thank you, Chair.
I don't know how long you spoke with Councillor Collins. Councillor Glan, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just going back to the consultation responses. Under growth metrics and shared prosperity, there's obviously a significant strand of feedback challenges. I suspect understates it, but it says respondents call for the plan to be clearer about how growth will translate into better lived outcomes through additional metrics or explicit governance mechanisms. I think there was always a degree of scepticism amongst residents about the need for this local authority to be combined. However, we are here, but I think we need to pick up on that feedback and reflect it. I think in section 6 and section 7 of the local growth plan about including outcomes and key metrics, social value and sustainable growth. I think, and there's only one line in here at the moment on each of those. I think we need substantially more detail in terms of delivery and outcomes if we're to show that, you know, what this combined authority is seeking to do is making an impact on residents' lives and not just some people, but the whole community. So that's more of a feedback rather than a question, but I think we do need to say a lot more about where the big players and so on in this end up actually affecting residents on the ground.
If I might, absolutely recognise that. I think there's two parts to that kind of question. I think there's an issue about, you know, will the growth plan be clear in what it's seeking to achieve, and what those impacts will be, and we're doing that work at the moment and trying to work out what kind of ambitious but realistic benchmarks would be over a 10-year period. That's always difficult given the cyclical nature of the economy. But, you know, what story do we want to be able to tell? We do want to be able to tell a clear story to residents about the kind of type and scale of economic growth that the plan seeks to achieve. The other point, which the feedback in the consultation was particularly focused on, was, and we all be familiar with these arguments, you know, GVA does not gross value added, economic growth does not equal well-being and happiness for all.
Yeah.
We absolutely accept that. I think it's important to see the role of the local growth plan as this mayoral strategic authority forms alongside other plans. So the game plan, which you considered last time, which is due to come forward to the HEYCA board shortly, is that broader framework, which is not just about growth, but is also about, you know, healthy life expectancy. It is about, you know, the level of employment our children can expect and all that sort of thing. So the growth plan sits within that broader framework, and I would argue it does a particular job, or it needs to do a particular job to meet the statutory requirements, which is principally about driving economic growth. But that doesn't mean that's the authority's some temporary project.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I think we do. There is a high degree of cynicism out there, I think. I mean, I was at a little old people's coffee morning this morning, and I happened to mention I was going to be coming to the Scrutiny committee for the combined authority, and a little old lady said to me, "I hope you give the mayor hell because he hasn't done anything yet," which is that's ground level feedback from a pensioner in Headden. But I'm afraid that's the sort of perception, perhaps, of many residents at the moment, is we're nearly a year in and they're not seeing anything yet. So when we do go public with the growth plan, I think we need to have clear measurables in terms of what people are likely to see, so that they can see that the mayor is making a difference.
So if I may, Councillor Glam, would you suggest that both a dissemination plan, i.e. actually getting that information out to the public, but also what would you say, key indicators to
I think key indicators is the thing, and publication, publicity,
Going back to Councillor Haynes' comment, what feels like yesterday now, just about that measure that and just to make sure that it can be tangible and actually we can monitor the progress and assess the success of it, or lack thereof.
But it's covered in 6 and 7 in the, you know, managing delivery and the social value and sustainable growth. Points, really.
Well, thank you very much, Councillor Lyons. Are there any further questions from members on this subject? So if you could just give me a moment then, please, just to write up my points, because Councillor Grant moved much quicker than I. Thank you. So, if I may, I also have just a couple of questions myself, Steve. Sorry, but you thought you'd got away with it then. So if we look at 6.1 specifically on page 3 of the report, on page 25 of the agenda, there's 3 dash points there, and it does seem very 3 quick points, but actually, if you look at each of them, there's more to explore in all, I believe. So the first one is an economic overview of the area. It says there's no set framework for local growth plans other than that they should be as a minimum setting out the key economic overview of an area. Now, at our last meeting, something we discussed as being a particularly strong characteristic of this area when compared with others was the proportion of small and medium enterprises. From my memory serves, it was Councillor Sell that brought that up at the time. And I just wanted to make sure that point was recognised in those comments from that meeting, including Appendix 1. And that's something that the local growth plan is going to be keen to see as a core element. And a yes or no answer would be fine.
Yes.
Fantastic, thank you. The next one is that the shared priorities between the mayoral strategic authority and central government. Now, my question is, how can the local growth plan ensure that the division of responsibilities is correctly acknowledged? I'm thinking if we are talking about electrification of train lines, that's already been mentioned today. Councillor Hale mentioned ahead of the transport briefing in December. And indeed, there's also talk of a new station at Melton where there is an enterprise zone and an industrial estate. I would suggest they're most likely to be nationally funded priorities, but obviously local growth will be dependent on their delivery or not, as the case may be. So can I ask if this framework will include that sort of thing?
Simple answer is yes, it will include that sort of thing. The slightly longer answer is that the shared priorities within a local growth plan are, because they are shared, a process of negotiation between the combined authority and government departments. And so the exact nature of those is still being finalised. So, but the exact example you spoke about is one that we have suggested is a key priority for the region.
Well, thanks very much. I think that ties in nicely to Councillor Grant's comments about the big plays and the key indicators, and indeed the updates and bringing the information back to this committee. So thank you very much. And the last one from me on this particular element is the investment pipeline of priority projects that have specific significance for driving growth. So really, it's what will this involve and what will it actually look like? Just if you could make it tangible for us, please. Thanks the picture.
So I think the simplest thing to say is high level. So the government guidance asks for 4 to 10 of the most substantial investment priorities. So they are things which are near to market opportunities of very substantial scale, which are linked to our growth driving sectors, which, as we'll remember from last time, I think as outlined here, are energy, manufacturing, agri-tech and food, and also logistics. So they will look, I think, like schemes that people will find familiar, because if you were to look for large tracts of land or large investable opportunities in the region, you will probably already identify them. The delivery plan as a whole, those investments sit within, will be much longer and will effectively provide the forward plan for the combined authority for the next few years, along with key public sector investments we need to see around, say, flooding, rail investment, etc. But the region's most enticing private sector investment opportunities will not be magic out of thin air. They exist. You will already know that.
Well, it does actually say in Appendix 2 on page 11 of the report and 39 of our agendas that one of the things that came from the feedback from the consultation was explain more clearly how evidence, big plays, sector priorities and delivery decisions connect. And indeed, that's an instruction from the public as well as now this committee. And actually tying all those together will be, again, what I'll call chapter 3 of the journey that this committee is going on down the path of the local growth plan. And similarly, the next point was demonstrating that the plan addresses the whole Hull and East Yorkshire geography, including rural and coastal communities, smaller towns and neighbourhoods, and indeed urban areas, as Councillor Hale alluded to earlier. I'm just making that point eminently clear there. So what I'd say there is thank you very much. Are there any further questions from the committee at this point? Councillor Bibb, please.
Yeah, just a suggestion going forward. I think if we have the mayoral portfolio holder here, we ought to put them first on the agenda because we don't want to get in this situation where Councillor Handley's sadly been sat here for an hour and 3/4 to give us 15 minutes of questions. I think it's not only a waste of Councillor Handley's time, it's disappointing for us. So perhaps in future we could put portfolio holders first on the agenda.
As a rule, I'd expect every item to have a portfolio holder unless extenuating circumstances meant they were otherwise engaged. But what I would suggest is that Democratic Services ensure that from 2 till 5, whoever's invited has that part of their diary booked out.
I agree with Charlie.
Or perhaps make questions a bit more succinct. Not ask the same questions over and over.
That will, not my remit, but I will practice, councillor. No, not my specialty.
I don't accept that. I think that this is an East Riding building with East Riding connectivity. Someone could sit and do some other work and come in. It's not unreasonable to expect someone to stay for the meeting. I find it rude that they haven't personally.
Well, if they were informed that they were on an agenda from 3 till 4, which is as printed,
Okay.
and they scheduled that
In
time.
future, I think you're absolutely right. People have been paid extra for this, remember?
Actually, councillor Handley isn't.
No, is she not?
No.
Ah, right. Okay, then I take that back.
Steve, you want to come in?
Just to note on an administrative point, and the diary holders for 2 until 4. It may be that needs to be changed in the future.
Well, at the very first meeting, and as I alluded to when we sat back down after the break, we did say that we are job and knock. We go in when the job's done. The last meeting we finished at 4:30. The one before we finished at 1 minute to 5. But we go home when it's done. I do agree with councillor Bibb that we do need to be succinct, myself more so than others. But at the same time, we do have a job to do, and rushing through it does feel somewhat untoward and disingenuous of our purpose.
I've also got responsibilities to 50 people whose jobs are at risk. And that's why I will not apologise for taking up some of your time to discuss those issues. Absolutely.
Well, but no, I think it's important to note as well. This is our third meeting. This is councillor Handley's first attendance. We've still yet to have councillor Ross or councillor Dad come to this committee, and indeed councillor Tucker's only presented to us via the briefing process. So this is, I'll call teething issues and something that we're working out. And apologies in advance to councillor Handley, who will probably be most displeased tomorrow when she works out that by default I accidentally called her a guinea pig.
I'll tell her.
And now I'm emigrating. So since this is my last meeting, I would like to thank you all members for your contributions to this meeting. But no, are there any further questions from any committee members on the subject of the local growth plan? Now, I realise this has felt somewhat rushed, but I would point out that we did spend an hour and a half on this very subject in our last meeting. Ultimately, what I wanted to see at today's meeting was reassurance that the points we raised have been heard, acknowledged, and actually will be brought to the board to be implemented. And councillor Handley did give us that before she left. We've gone through what I'll call the bureaucracy. We've gone through the specifics of how we move forward with this agenda item. And I think the term that was escaping me earlier is granular. That's what this will become. We will be looking at it in its detail as we move forward, and we'll go from the strategic to the precise. And on that note, I would like to thank the committee members, express my gratitude for your vigour and assuredness of purpose. I don't think there's any shrinking lilies in this room. It does mean that sometimes you have to talk it through to understand the perspective of others and come to that consensus. And in this case, I will now move on to the recommendations as I've been writing them. And the one that was debated at length would be the process of looking at commercially sensitive elements of the future delivery of the local growth plan. I have boiled that down in my efforts to be concise, councillor Bibb, to Tony to advise and Democratic Services to coordinate on how best to ensure the information is presented to the committee in a manner with which we can perform meaningful scrutiny. Would that be acceptable to everybody? And does that encapsulate the discussion? Councillor Cousins, please.
All I was going to say was I had the feeling that it wasn't the fact that some of it would be commercially sensitive, which councillors should have the right to see. Some of it was around a fast moving feast. Yes. And being quick off the mark, and maybe with Democratic Services approval, we could make it as a standing item on the agenda for discussion by exemption as to whether there is any investment opportunity with some granularity around it. Scrutinize. And it happens on a monthly basis. There's nobody held up by it.
Well, at the moment, we have a meeting every other month of the committee and a briefing every other month in between. So as a committee, we do tend to meet every 4 weeks. And it has been arranged that way by design specifically to keep up some of the momentum. I do think that we could have exempt papers as part of our agenda. We don't even necessarily need to discuss them unless there's an element of concern or contention. But using the agenda process to make sure we're kept updated, I believe to be sensible and prudent. And I don't see Kunwar or Gabriella shaking with fear, so I don't think that's an overwhelming ask. So is that something that can be accommodated?
Suggestion?
Yes, just the provision of any exempt items as part of the agenda for councillors. At East Riding, I don't know if it's the same in Hull, we use green paper. And so that element comes to councillors to be shared that way, but not necessarily on the publicised agendas.
We use yellow,
We
but
use
I'm
yellow.
sure there could be a.
We can compromise on the colour.
And technically, it's not an issue. But when the reports are written, it's up to the report authors to indicate if there's any exempt items in there. It's in there. We can even split the reports if needed to ensure maximum transparency. But it is the purview of the report author and decision makers to provide that at the time of, but in principle, it's not a problem.
Well, considering the board will be meeting long before our next meeting, could I ask Steve if you could please take that conversation back to the board, please? And if I may put words in your mouth, it would be that the scrutiny committee was very keen to make sure it was taken along on this journey and would be grateful for suitable arrangements to be made to share and circulate information as and when it's available to ensure transparency and democratic accountability. Thank you very much. So I think that's covered that off nicely and more succinctly than I expected we'd be able to after the discussion earlier. And it was also the second recommendation I'd written down. I just wanted to get that one out of the way first as the awkward one. The first recommendation was going back to Councillor Bibb, and that was a lessons learned exercise and a wider engagement strategy. And that's not necessarily for the local growth plan, but indeed it's become apparent because of the local growth plan that it's something that the organisation should adopt across the piece. And I'm seeing nods around the room, so thank you very much, members. The next one I've got is how are responsibilities divided between the mayoral authority and national government, and how delivery can be sought to enable growth locally. And Steve very kindly gave us a detailed answer on that subject. And as far as recommendations go, I just think it would be helpful in documentation, whether it's papers for this committee, whether it's papers for the board, or indeed whether it's the drafting of a formally adoptable local growth plan, an actual complete finalised documents. If there could be a breakdown, a ragtag rating, if you will, where it details which bits are MCA, which bits are other authorities, and what work's being done by the MCA to ensure that other partners are delivering in the way that we would hope they would. I.e., how is the board campaigning for our area? How is it championing our local need? How is it fulfilling its remit? And the discussions about the very existence of the board have been covered today, and I would suggest cover that well. And then the final one, and it really comes down to Councillor Glant's points earlier, was a dissemination plan with key indicators alongside updates on delivery relating to the big plays. And much in the same vein as Councillor Cousins has just suggested about the exempt items, I think that's something that we would like to be kept abreast of regularly, either via the agenda process or perhaps even briefing notes. And I see no objections around the room, so I'm going to say that's agreed, and that's 4 recommendations there. Is there anything further members would like to add? And Steve, is there anything you'd like to conclude with, or anything you think that we should be made aware of that's not yet been covered? Thank you. Members?
Just that when we do these recommendations to the executive board, do we then get feedback? Because this was funny enough what our chair of overview suggested last time at Hull in Hull was that do we then get feedback as to what happens to our advice, whether it does get taken on board or whether there's an acceptance of some or not? Because these aren't these aren't recommendations to cabinet. We're just going to say, all right, then these are recommendations to a group of people who may or may not agree with them. So yes, I think there needs to be some sort of feedback loop as to what happens to our, because it might be taken on board and we might think, great, it might not be. I just think we need to know.
Well, it's funny you mention that because I am sat next to the chairman of OMC at East Riding, the Overview and Management Committee, and we've had this chat both recently and on multiple occasions. I've also raised it with Kunwar directly as well, and specifically asked for that feedback process, because ultimately what we want to know is what the board's doing with our suggestions, or if they're not, why not? So whilst I would suggest if we're willing to put the work in, we deserve explanation. justification should come by way of explanation, but it must be tangible and it must be transparent.
Absolutely.
And that is something that Kumar has assured me, that him and his wizardry is more than capable of delivering to this committee.
Chair, you attend the executive board now,
Yes.
so there's a link there. But beyond May, I'm proposing to put a scrutiny recommendation tracker in place.
Brilliant, yeah.
So that is have the full golden thread
Yeah.
going from here to come back to us. So we can keep an eye on what's going on. We'll come back.
And so there is redundancy baked into the system as well. And also it is in writing as well. The scrutiny tracker will make sure this committee is informed and that it's there in black and white to be pointed at. So I think that's as robust a process as is possible to see delivered. I'm very, very glad I've done the work to make sure that was set up before Councillor Hale's question, so there's no need to plan them. So thank you very much, members. So I think we have therefore covered everything from the agenda item, I'll check the number, agenda item 6. Thank you very much, Councillor Gallant's always got my back there with the local growth plan stage 2. And apologies, I was using the word chapter earlier. I should have been using stages to keep with the agenda. So if we're okay with that, members, can we move on to the cabinet forward plan and agenda item? So the first thing I would like to do is to commend the detail and to express gratitude for the previous elements being retained in it as we move forward. Rather than just a picture in time, we are actually building a story there. So, Councillor Gallant, when you do see your pensioners at your coffee mornings, they ask what the mayor's done. You have a 10-page document of everything that's been achieved over the last year, right there, that you'll be more than able to show them. It's something that I hope you like. Kumar, is there anything you'd like to bring up about the cabinet forward plan?
And no, thank you, Chair, except what's in there and your attendance. Ready.
Yes, Councillor Haley alluded to attending a meeting of the board earlier in the meeting. And ever since assuming the role of chair, I've attended every single meeting and even muscled my way onto the table to tell them what's on a couple of occasions. So if you're ever bored on a Friday morning and have YouTube and popcorn handy, please feel free to watch the show. Cheers, Steve. So, member, are there any questions or points to raise with regards to the cabinet forward plan that we haven't already covered? Councillor Collinson, please.
As you may gather, I'm easily confused. Combined Authority 30th of January 26th, the Combined Authority Assurance Framework Review and the Adult Skills Fund delegated decision making and process. Have these things been scrutinised or have we just not bothered with that? Or?
Ramon, is there anything you'd like to say on that one?
Page 46.
Yeah. I think the reality of scrutiny is that we are unable to scrutinize every single thing.
All right.
However, I think one of the statutory guidance around scrutiny is to prioritize what we're going to focus on. And we have been focusing on game plan, local growth plan, and some of the high big ticket items. They are available and should the members have, I think the purpose of this is, should the member feel there is something we ought to put in our work program going forward, then this is a good indication to flag it when we have our workshop coming up soon.
If I could add to that as well, and Councillor Collins, your question is a prudent one, especially since you joined the month after we had this conversation. That this is, if you look, it's the whole East Yorkshire Combined Authority Assurance Framework Review, where we have actually been through the framework ourselves via the game plan, the Adult Skills Fund and the Transport Funding and Regulatory Powers effectively are the fund, and then at our workshop in October, we decided to focus on the strategic and on the policy, and expected that each individual element when it comes to funding agreements and acquisition would be covered under the strategy and the policy, and that would be the best time to examine those elements. So the transport policy, the transport plan will all be drafted and ready to deliver in autumn of this year. And it was decided that we would look at all that and indeed the funding that was attracted at that juncture under one roof. So it's a question of hitting the right notes at the right time and all of them in the right order. And so I would suggest that I wouldn't worry that we've not missed anything, and that as a committee we were diligent in our workshop in making sure that we didn't miss anything.
All right, Chair, that's it. Thank you for that clarification.
And we did sit there for a good hour and a half after a 6-hour training session. And as I've wound Julie up, they gave him the finance talk after lunch, which was just mean. So we were all a bit groggy then, because it was a good lunch.
Okay.
But yes,
I'm starting to wish I hadn't asked, but thank you.
I would never wish to instill that sentiment in any of the members here. I've got nothing better to do anyway. So no, any further questions on the forward plan from members? in that case, then agenda item 8, the work programme, which I think actually we've pretty much covered there as well. Kumar, anything further to report, please?
We are working to finalize the date for the game plan briefing, as we discussed earlier. And then we have March meeting scheduled, and then we will be planning to do the teams briefing in April on get written work.
I thought we had 18th of February.
We're waiting, yeah.
18th of February was suggested because it's effectively 4 weeks today and then 4 weeks to the day before the next meeting.
Right.
Having spoken to Gabriella about this, unfortunately, Steve's not available on that day. And so it's looking like it will probably be Tuesday, the 17th of February at 2 o'clock. But that remains to be seen. So I'd ask that members pencil rather than chisel it into their diaries.
Okay.
Is that there, Gabriella?
I may not be available at that point.
Another reason to have name subs, councillor Collinson.
Try and work on it.
Yeah, as I said, that's looking more likely, but not certain by any means yet. Fortunately, we have people who put jigsaws together, and coordinating the diaries of 15 people is never an easy task. So I would ask that you watch this space, please, members. On that note, then, that would mean that the next agenda item is agenda item 9, date of the next meeting. That one we can confirm is the 18th of March, 2026. So if everyone's happy with that, that will be our last meeting of the year, and then we'll be looking at the work programme for the following year. So thank you very much, members, and we'll finish 12 minutes early. So if anybody knows any jokes, stories, anecdotes, in that case, I'll let everybody get off then. Thank you very much.